Okay, Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Jazakallah khair, brothers, for turning up on a Saturday for this Dawah training course. And secondly, apologies for being late. We were on the way and we just mistimed it. So, forgive us for that, inshallah. Brothers at the back, if you can move forward, inshallah, because we're going to have some interactive sessions as well as we go through the course. So it'd be better if all of the brothers are together and you're sitting next to someone, inshallah. Okay, bismillah. So what we're going to cover today is our Dawah training course that we do. It's a level 1 Dawah training course. It's a short course. So we have a full course which is about a day to 2 days long. Okay, this is the short condensed version. But saying that, you're going to get everything, inshallah, all of the key things you need to be able to effectively go out and start engaging with people, inshallah. Okay, and that's the intent here, because we know, everyone knows why you may have your own different reasons for doing the Dawah training course, but what's the main reason we're here today? Who can tell me? Propagate the deen, absolutely, yeah. But specifically today in Birmingham, why are we doing the Dawah training course at As-Suffa? Yes. Commonwealth Games, yeah. That's in what, next week starting, I think? Yeah, and it's 2 weeks, right? So the intent here, one of the intentions here is, because there's people coming in from all over and they're going to be watching these games, how do we in Birmingham now talk to these people, give them da'wah, tell them about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, tell them about Islam, tell them about the purpose of their life, right? So we're going to cover that today, inshallah. And like I said, we'll make it practical, so everything we learn, you can start to implement it straight away by practicing, and that will inshallah solidify in your minds too. So next slide, Murtala. So some course objectives. The screen's massive here, subhanAllah. Normally I'm used to you looking at a very small screen, but this is going to be a bit tricky. So course objectives. Number 1, the right tools and confidence to give da'wah. Because most of the time, the real issue is confidence. It's not that we don't know what to say. It's not that we don't know how to give da'wah, right? Which we'll cover. But when even in the first maybe half an hour, when we go through some of the fundamentals on what is da'wah, what are we supposed to communicate and convey to people when we're talking about Islam in a da'wah context, we'll realize that we have that knowledge already, right? We know this, but it's the confidence aspect which sort of sticks us sometimes. So we'll look at how to overcome that as well, inshallah. The obligations of da'wah we'll quickly touch upon. The rewards of da'wah, again, we'll touch upon something you guys are probably already well versed with. Number 4, the consequences. Number 5, a simple but effective roadmap. So that's what we're going to give you. It's not the only way. We're going to be covering what we call the GORAP method. Who's heard of the GORAP Dawah training method? Who's done or gone through a GORAP Dawah training course? Okay, a couple of us. So I'm not going to be picking on you for questions, inshallah, today, right? But we're going to give you a map. Now, the GORAP is one method, okay? It's not the only method, right? There is no standardized method that we're supposed to follow when giving da'wah. There are things we need to cover as Muslims when giving da'wah, but the way you do it, there's many ways. What we've noticed is the GORAP is very effective in a Western context, right? With the way people think today in the 21st century, that sort of, that post-logical positivist mindset of seeing is believing, I want rational proof, give me evidence, etc. It works well with most of these people, right? But you'll realize sometimes when you're giving da'wah to someone, they may not need rational arguments. So in that case, just put it aside. Give them what they need. Okay, so you will sometimes there'll be times where you just say, okay, scrap for now. I don't need it for this conversation. But at other times you'll realize, okay, this is exactly what I need. Inshallah, so it's giving you guys the tools and a roadmap, not the only roadmap, inshallah. Next slide. Okay, some preliminary notes before we start. This is a foundational course. There's no deep philosophical discussions in this course. Who believes we need deep philosophical discussions or deep philosophy to give da'wah? Alhamdulillah, we don't, right? You don't need philosophy, complex logical arguments to give da'wah, right? At the time of the Prophet ﷺ, how many arguments were used? How many philosophical arguments were used? Arguments may have been used. Basic reason was used. That's something Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala encourages us to do in the Quran. In chapter 52 of the Quran, verses 35 and 36, were they created by nothing? Or were they the creators of themselves? Or did they create the heavens and the earth? But rather they are not certain. So there is logic there, there's reasoning there, but it doesn't need to take the form of a philosophical argument or a syllogism, right? Although you can use it depending on context, right? But the essence is to get the message to them, inshallah. So, prerequisite, a good grounding in the basics of Islam, which inshallah all of us have. Dawah is worship and requires sincerity and correct actions. Okay, next slide. What is that? Nice. Yeah, actually, click this. Okay, so what is dawah? Yes, brother.
Calling people to Islam.
Calling people to Islam. Okay, that's a good start. Who can be more specific?
Invitation.
Invitation? Okay, let's be more specific. What's the invitation? Yes, brother. La ilaha illallah. Yep. That there is no deity or being worthy of worship except Allah. Anything else anyone can add to that?
Convey the message.
Convey the message, yeah. What are we conveying? La ilaha illallah, absolutely. But what goes with this now?
Salvation through Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Yep, salvation through Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So following the Prophet, peace be upon him, as our example, the way
To submit to Allah.
to submit to Allah. Good. Okay, so what does that mean now? Yeah.
Like our purpose, that what we're meant to be doing in this life is to follow Islam, so all our actions are for Allah.
So good, our purpose in this life. Now what is that? What does Allah tell us? What is that?
To serve him.
To serve him? To worship him, right? This is key. So there's three real parts: to tell people that Allah is uniquely one, that there is no other creator except Allah, that the Prophet ﷺ is the final messenger in the line of prophethood, and that you have to realize He created you for a purpose, which is to worship Him. Where does Allah say this in the Quran? وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. That Allah did not create the jinn kind and the human beings except to worship Him. We have to get this point across as well, right? It's not good enough for us to go out there and say, you have one God. Okay, imagine the person acknowledges this, alhamdulillah, he's on the way. But if he just acknowledges this one God and he goes about continuing to live his life as he is, has he really benefited from us? Has he really understood the essence of Islam, which is submission now to this one God? So the recognition of Tawheed has to change you as a person. It has a direct effect on you. That means, okay, you recognize that there's one creator. What does that mean? He created me. What does that also mean? He sustains me, He provides for me, He nourishes me, He gives me everything I have. And therefore, I should what? I should worship Him. That's what I was created to do. So we have to also tell them about worship. So the dawah, essentially, linguistically, the root implies to call or to invite. From an Islamic perspective, it specifically means to call and invite to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to submit to Allah, to worship Him. Right? That's what we have to get across. Now, we know the word da'wah has been transported into other languages. Right? Who speaks Urdu here? Bengali? Well, is it called Bengali? It's what's the language called?
Bangla.
Bangla, yeah? The word dawat exists in these languages now. What does that word mean in those languages? Biryani, biryani, yeah, absolutely. It does mean biryani in most cases, yeah. But it means to what? It means to call? Invitation, okay? What is it invitation to? Meal? Okay, let me put it this way. You can call someone for a meal to your house, to a nashta or a khana, whatever, lunch, yeah? Or you can call someone to a dawat. What's the difference between the two? If you were to be... Large gathering, okay, good. So it's a large gathering, yes?
It's usually for a purpose, like you're celebrating something.
So it's like a celebration, it's for a purpose, therefore it's more lavish. There's a lot more there. It's an event, right? Now let me ask you guys this question. When you invite someone to a dawat, how do you do it? Card, okay, yeah. You'll specifically produce a card for them because it's nice, it's formal. What else would you do?
Personally, meet them face to face.
Face to face, yeah. How would your characteristics be? How would your manners be? Yes, brother? You'd have good adab with them, yeah? And that would mean what? You'd smile, you'll be welcoming, you'll encourage them, you'll follow up with them, you'll use the best language possible, your tone would be a certain way. No one here would invite someone to a dawat by pulling their collar or dragging them or shouting at them, right? Now the reason I'm mentioning this is a da'wah for a worldly affair. But when you're giving da'wah, when you're calling to Allah, there is nothing greater than that. So if our mannerisms, our etiquettes would be so good in the case of inviting someone to a worldly event, how should our manners and etiquettes be when inviting to Allah? Right? If you were working for a big corporation in this world, imagine you're working for Apple or Samsung or, I don't know, Microsoft, and imagine you were the front-facing representative of the company. What would they expect of you? They'd expect that you dress the best, you present yourself in the best way, you use the best language, all of these things. And if you didn't do any of these things, what would they do? They'd fire you, yeah? They'd get rid of you, yeah? So, and the reason I'm mentioning this now, because I want us to have a bit of a paradigm shift in regards to this. There's a lot of dawah going on in the West, a lot of dawah. A lot of dawah everywhere. Who's seen Speaker's Corner videos? Most of us, and I'm sure some of us are not going to put our hands up, right? We've all watched Speaker's Corner videos, most of us have. There's a lot of dawah happening, you can say, but when it's taking place, when you're watching these conversations, how are the characteristics and the manners and the etiquettes of our brothers that are doing the dawah in Speaker's Corner, generally speaking? There are some brothers that conduct themselves in an amazing way, mashallah, no doubt. But generally, when you watch these videos, what do you see as far as etiquettes and conduct? Yes? Conflict, yeah? Argumentative. Confrontational, yeah? What else? People speaking over each other, yeah? The brother.
There's a lot of passion that comes across as being aggressive.
Yeah, aggression. There's a lot of passion there, absolutely. But even if you're passionate, you have to learn to tame your passion in a way where you come across as genuinely concerned about the person, as opposed to as if you're speaking down to the person. Yeah, so all of this, now imagine a non-Muslim is watching this, because non-Muslims do watch these videos. Yeah? What are they going to see? When they look at this type of behavior, are they going to relate to such a person or just have this aversion towards that person? Yeah, imagine your own lives. We've all come across two different types of people. We've come across people that have been very nice to us, very loving towards us, and how have we inclined towards those people? Do we want to spend more time with these people or less time with these people? More time. And we've also come across people who have shouted at us or said something really bad to us or looked down upon us. Do we want to be around those people? No. We want to distance ourselves from those people and whatever they follow, whatever they do. Right? So the way you give dawah is integral, and we don't pay attention to that. We always focus on what you're saying and what you're conveying, as opposed to also with that focusing on how you're saying it. Right? Because when it comes to communication or speech, there's always two parts. There's what you say and how you say it. And we're not focusing on the how you say it. And that's something the Prophet ﷺ and all of the messengers of Allah led by example. They showed us the way in regards to that. And we'll discuss this as we go along, but I want us to start thinking about this now, because when we cover this content and you start going out and giving da'wah, you have to be cognizant of this. How am I conducting myself? How am I coming across? Inshallah. So we don't need to go into too much detail in regards to this. The need for da'wah is evident, right? There's the media, certain aspects of the media, certain non-Muslims, certain Islamophobes, certain atheists out there who have a narrative, who have an agenda. They are misrepresenting Islam day in and day out, yeah? And they have a lot of power behind them and a lot of money that's been pumped into their sort of social media presences and all of this type of stuff. So that negative information is all out there. Now, on top of this, unfortunately, Muslims aren't doing too much of a good job as far as representing Islam. Even in their conduct, put the dawah aside, just the way we behave and engage with non-Muslims in our communities. Right? So there's a lot of misinformation out there. And people need to know. Yeah, they're confused. They don't know. And this fundamentally, this is one main reason for us to give da'wah. But there are more fundamental reasons. Now, before we go into some of these points, I want to ask you guys, why do you think it's important to give da'wah? What do you guys think? Yes, brother.
Is it obligatory?
Sorry, say that again? It's an obligation. How do we know it's an obligation? Where does it say it's an obligation?
So Sunnah, the Prophet gave dawah.
Okay, the Prophet ﷺ gave da'wah. So it's the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, absolutely. But where is an obligation? Yes, brother.
Rasulullah said, "Ballighu anni wa law aya," like convey to.
Yes. Yeah, good. So the Prophet ﷺ said, convey from me even if it's one ayah. Alright? Now I'm gonna sidetrack a bit and get into a side point because you've mentioned that, and then we'll come back to this. When the Prophet ﷺ said, convey from me even if it's one ayah, how are we to understand this? Because this is a very important point. There's a spectrum. You can see as a spectrum, right? Imagine a line here. On one side of the spectrum, you have brothers that say, just give dawah, don't worry about knowledge, don't worry about learning, just keep giving dawah. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have people that say, don't give dawah, it's not for you to give dawah, it's only for a specific group of people to give dawah. What is that middle path here? Yes, brother?
Work within your capacity, how much you know, and the connections you have, what you can do, how much you should be doing.
Yep, absolutely. Stay within your capacity, stay within your lane, right? So yes, the Prophet ﷺ told us to give dawah. He's emphasized this by telling us, convey from me even if it's one ayah. Everyone knows one ayah here, right? Everyone knows what makes them Muslim, inshallah. So at least convey that to people. Because the urgency is there in what the Prophet ﷺ is saying. You have to convey, right? But convey what you know with clarity and certainty, with basira. That was the way of the Prophet ﷺ. Don't start talking about things or going into things you have no knowledge about, right? Because these days, everyone's an expert on everything, right? When you go out there, everyone knows everything, right? But the problem is, when you in the dawah, and I've seen this so many times, when you are in a dawah conversation with someone, and they ask you a question that you don't know the answer to, or you may have researched years ago, but you don't remember clearly, and you almost feel the need, you know, this force on you that you have to answer them. And I've seen brothers do this. They try to give an answer and they don't know what they're talking about, and then they start contradicting themselves. And not only do they contradict themselves, but even in their body language, it comes across like they don't know what they're talking about. They're stuttering, they're confused, their eyes are rolling all over the place. People pick up on this, right? They're going to know this person's making this up. This person isn't sure of what they're saying. Now, what perception is that going to create in the non-Muslim's mind? Right? He's going to be like, I already knew they do all of these bad things, and now I know they're also liars. Right? And that's a far greater allegation in some ways, because the Prophet ﷺ has told us that the Muslim can't be what? He can't be what? He can't be a liar. Right? So we don't want to put ourselves in such a position. If you don't know something, say you don't know. Right? This was the way of our pious predecessors. If they didn't know something, scholars, great scholars of the past, we're nothing compared to them. If they didn't know something, they will say they don't know. And say that level of humility is really going to pay off. Because contrary to what we think, that if I don't tell them the answer, they're going to think I don't know anything. Instead, what they're going to think is this guy's humble. You know, everyone knows everything these days, but this guy asked him something he didn't know, he said he doesn't know. But what do you do instead of that? You say, I don't know, but let me take your details. I'll find out for you and I'll get back to you. Right? But don't get yourself into that position where you have to make up stuff or guesswork and get yourself confused. But that should also motivate you to keep learning as well, inshallah. Keep gaining knowledge so you can keep sharing more as you're giving dawah. Right? So, importance of dawah. Anyone else? Why is it important to you? Why is dawah important to you? Yes, brother. The reward, okay. So give me some specific rewards of giving da'wah. Yes, brother.
Whoever guides someone to goodness will have the same reward.
Yes, the Prophet ﷺ has told us that if someone guides someone to a good, then they would have the reward equal to that. Nothing will be taken away from the reward of that person. Right? Now think about that from a da'wah context. You know, imagine you invite someone and someone becomes a Muslim. You know, and then you help them with the basics. Say you teach them how to read Fatiha and you teach them how to pray, establish the salah. Each time they establish the salah, the rewards are coming back to you. Right? Even when you're in your grave and they carry on praying, the rewards are coming back to you. Imagine they teach their wife how to pray and then the kids how to pray, the rewards are coming back to you. Right? So it's an actual pyramid scheme that works. Right? It's not one of those shoddy pyramid schemes in the world where they promise you things and you get nothing out of it at the end. It's one that works. You guide someone by the leave of Allah. Allah makes you the means for the guidance of a person, and they pray and they establish prayer, that reward is all coming back to you. So there's immense rewards from that perspective. Anything else? Yes, brother.
Give people a fair chance to accept or reject the message.
Yep, so I don't, so you're saying give people a fair chance to accept or reject the message. Okay, but how is that a motivation for you?
Because it's like the idea of salvation, isn't it? You're giving them the chance to understand the true message of
Okay, so you're concerned about them.
Yeah.
You know, at least you're sharing with them what you know is true. Okay, good. Yep. Anything else?
I've got a question, brother.
Yes, brother.
Like, say, for example, we come into contact with non-Muslims, and we're in a position where we can give dawah, even, just explain to the non-Muslim what they believe simply, not in detail,
Hmm.
but we don't do it. Is it the opposite can happen to us? Are we sinful for that?
I'm not a scholar, so I can't tell you the specific rulings on that, but there are situations, I could practically tell you what the case is. Many times we will find ourselves in situations where you know how to give da'wah, but you're in a situation where you can't really give da'wah to that person. So there may be factors. If it's at workplace or school, sometimes there's rules and regulations in place where you can't, and you'll get in trouble. I know a dentist brother from up north in Lake District, and he was giving da'wah to his patients while fixing their teeth, and he got in trouble, right? He got in trouble for it, and he got a warning for it. So there's certain situations you can't, but then there will be certain situations where you can, but you don't, right? Now, why don't you? You have to look into it. Like, is it because you genuinely, the fear overtook you to the degree where you couldn't do it, right? Then you just, that's our weakness as human beings. But if it was that you weren't afraid, you were confident, but you didn't give da'wah to that person, you're like, no, I'm not going to give da'wah to them. I just don't want to. Then you're putting yourself in a very dangerous position. I will be careful of that position. If you genuinely just fear overtakes you, you don't know what to say, you're overwhelmed, then Allah is the most forgiving. He's the most merciful. Yeah, but we should always try to overcome that. And inshallah, we're going to try to help overcome that today. Inshallah. Any other motivations?
There's a verse in the Quran where Allah says, "Call to the people with good will," if I'm correct.
Call to the people with
Good.
good instruction. Yeah. Invite to the way of your Lord. Yeah. So Allah is telling us directly to call people to the way of Allah, right? Other things to think about. There are surahs in the Quran. There are surahs in the Quran which we read on a daily basis that we've memorized, which have an element of dawah motivation for us. Who can tell me what I'm talking about? Think about.
Well, us.
Okay, Sheikh. What specifically about that?
Allah is taking an oath that everyone is in a state of loss except those who do these four things. They believe, they
Yeah.
do good things, and then they advise one another with good, and they're patient.
Yes.
Means giving dawah.
Yep. So the second part of the advice is those who advise to the truth, and the truth is what? Mufassirin, they've told us this truth is the whole of Islam. It's telling people, it's advising people in regards to Islam, and the advice to patience. So there's the dawah element there. But think about Surah Ikhlas. Who's memorized Surah Ikhlas? Everyone, right? We even think, what a silly question. I don't want to put my hand out, yeah? But we memorized Surah Ikhlas, right? How does Surah Ikhlas start? What's the first word? Qul. What does that mean? Say. Tell them. Tell them what? Yeah, He is Allah who's uniquely one. How many surahs of the Quran, short surahs of the Quran, begin with Qul? Yeah? And we don't pay attention to that first part. These are the bedrock. These are the foundations. Surah Ikhlas is a very powerful surah because it tells us about who Allah is. These are foundational concepts. And Allah is telling us to tell that, to convey that, to share that. Right? So the stories of the prophets, this is another interesting point. When we read the Quran, how much of the Quran would you say is to do with the stories of the prophets? About a third. Yeah, about a third. Right? Now when we read the stories of the prophets, and we need to remember back to reading the stories of the prophets, what do we hear about? What do we learn about? What are the main themes? Yes?
They were sent to warn their people.
They were sent to warn their people. We don't get details on how Ibrahim al-Islam prayed or how he fasted, right? We don't get details about their practice as much as we do their job, which is to call people, what they did, how they invited the people, what was the response of the people. Did they accept them? Did they reject them? If they rejected them, what did the prophets do then? You know? So all of these things we are learning about, it's all about the da'wah. It's all about the prophets giving da'wah. Now, if we really want to connect with this part of the Quran on another very deep level, then doesn't it make sense to experience, as to some degree, what they went through? To some small degree in the da'wah. Right? Because when you give da'wah yourself and you experience, and obviously you're not today, in today's day and age, you're not going to go out there and people aren't going to be, stoning you or beating you up. In most cases they won't, right? At least in the UK they won't, right? In other parts of Europe, it's not as easy. But in the UK, you're not going to face that type of challenge. But even the small rejection here or there, someone laughing at you, someone mocking you, you start to taste a little bit of what the prophets went through when they called their people. Right? And then you'll be able to connect to these parts of the Quran like you've never done before. Right? So that should motivate us. Now, I'm going to skip some of these slides, inshallah, because they're not relevant for us today. So rewards of giving da'wah. So here's another very interesting, and most of us know this, narration of the Prophet ﷺ, where he said, by Allah, if a single person is guided by Allah through you, it will be better for you than a whole host of red camels. Now, this is red camels in plural. What's the significance of this? Who can tell us what the value of red camels was to the Arabs? How precious were these red camels to the Arabs at the time of the Prophet ﷺ? Yes, brother.
They're like red Ferraris today.
Yeah, you can say that. Probably even today, in certain parts of Saudi, they have camel pageants, right? They have camel pageants, and even today, camels are sold for millions of dollars, right? Millions of dollars. And that is just a hobby today. Like now they have cars, they have supercars, etc. But back then, when there was no other means of transport, the red camel was the most prized possession. And the Prophet ﷺ is telling us, if Allah guides one person through you, that will be better for you than a whole host of red camels. And there is another narration which is very similar, where the Prophet ﷺ says, if Allah guides one person through you, it will be better for you than everything on the surface of this earth. Right? So what is the Prophet ﷺ getting across to us here in regards to someone being guided through you? What is the Prophet ﷺ teaching us?
The best of actions.
It's at least one of the best of actions. It's such a valuable action that if Allah guides one person through you, it will be better than anything you can imagine having in this world. Anything. Multiplied 1,000 times over. Right? Think about all of the money that's present on this earth. The precious metals, the precious stones, diamonds, all of these amazing things which people think are amazing. Right? All of the things we aspire for. Allah is saying, if Allah guides one person through you, the Prophet ﷺ is telling us that if Allah guides one person through you, it is better for you than any of these things you can imagine. All of these things. But for that to happen, what do we have to do first?
Do it? Actually do it?
There's something we have to do.
Educate ourselves.
Yeah, and then?
Give da'wah.
Give da'wah, right? You have to put yourself in that position, right? Put yourself in that position where Allah can utilize you and make you the means for someone to be guided. Right? So we have to put ourselves in that position. Now there's one more, I don't think it's on the slides. There's one more very powerful motivating factor that for me personally, whenever I think about it, it just gives me chills, yeah? In Surah Yasin, we find an amazing story of a man. Who remembers that story? Where Allah sends two messengers to a nation, right? Now let's recall that story because I want us to really appreciate the magnitude of this. Allah sends two messengers to a nation. Okay, now this is a nation probably thousands of years ago. Now if we go back a couple of thousand years, many thousand years, what happens to the population of the world? Does it increase or decrease? Decreases, right? So you can assume that this town, this community, this place, these two prophets were sent to, the population probably wasn't that big. Now Allah sends two messengers. Normally how many messengers does Allah send? One. There are occasions where Allah sends more than one at any given time, but normally it's one. And that one is sufficient. Why is that one messenger sufficient? Because he's been supported by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? But here Allah sends two. Now when the two messengers come, what are they going to be doing? Dawah, right? They're calling the people, they're inviting the people. Then what does Allah say? What does Allah do next? He sends a third. Think about this. This is a very unique situation, brothers. Now there's three messengers present amongst a community. And what are the messengers doing? They are giving da'wah. They're calling their people, they're inviting their people. Right? And we know that the messengers are sincere and they are doing everything they can to guide their people. And then we hear of a man. Don't know what his name is. Allah doesn't mention his name. Okay, and I want you to note that for a second. We don't know what his name is. Allah does not mention his name. Right? And this man does what? He comes what? He rushes in, comes rushing in from the furthest part. How is he coming? Is he taking a bus, train, boat? Maybe running on foot. Maybe riding an animal. Maybe he spent days traveling. We don't know. Right? But he comes rushing in. And when he comes to that place where the three messengers are, what does he do?
Confirms what they're saying.
Yeah, confirms what they're saying. Tells his people to follow the messengers. Now let me ask you a question here. If you were to be very specific, was this man giving direct da'wah or was he supporting the da'wah? Which one would you say he was doing? He's supporting the da'wah. Because there's three messengers present already. Right? And he's supporting the da'wah. Now as he does this, what do his people do? They kill him. Right? Does Allah tell us they kill him? Does Allah mention how they kill him? No. This is called ellipses in the Quran. There's missing parts of information that Allah has deliberately taken out. So make a note of that as well. We don't know how they killed him. Allah doesn't even mention it. Allah mentions that He told His people to follow the messengers, and then the next thing, what do we hear? When He's on the other side. And what does He say?
They follow.
Yeah, what does He say? Yes, brother.
Like how if the people knew the reward of Allah Ta'ala and how that what He's been given.
Yeah, how Allah's forgiven him, and how Allah's honored him. That He wanted His people to know this. Right? Now it's amazing. Let's take a bird's eye perspective on this now. Man, nameless man. Why is that significant? How do we normally identify people? How do we recognize people? By the name. This is Sheikh so-and-so. This is brother so-and-so. That's the first point. That's the first thing we do to identify someone. And here Allah removes his name. It's almost as if Allah is trying to tell us something, that his name isn't important. There's nothing in a name. What does Allah get us to focus on instead? His action. What does He do? What does He do? He supports the da'wah. He sincerely supports the da'wah. And then they kill him, but Allah omits this information too. We know they killed him because he's on the other side. But Allah goes straight to when he's on the other side and what he's found now with Allah. What is that? That's a reward. So Allah is getting us to focus on His action and His reward. And Allah is trying to get us to appreciate, maybe this is one of the wisdoms, not the only wisdom, one of the wisdoms, that Allah is getting us to appreciate the significance of what this man did. His actions were what made him. Not his name, not his lineage. His actions made him. His actions in the da'wah. Right? Now juxtapose his situation to our situation today. Compare his situation to our situation today. How many messages present today? 2, 3, 4? How many? 0. Right? So when you go and give da'wah today, are you just supporting the da'wah or are you trying to give direct da'wah yourself? Direct da'wah. Right? So as far as your action, inshallah, if we're sincere, it's going to be greater than what this man did. Now if his reward was so great, what would your potential reward be with Allah? What would our potential reward be with Allah? We can't even imagine it, brothers, honestly. We cannot begin to imagine it. We may see giving da'wah, standing at a table, handing out some leaflets, it's trivial, something small, I'll just take some time out. But on the other side, beyond this material realm, the way it's going to impact your life in the hereafter, we can't even begin to imagine. We cannot begin to imagine. And this is Allah. He will multiply these rewards for us in ways we can't ever imagine. But what do we have to do? We have to be sincere and we have to take action. Right? Those are the two things we need to focus on. Be sincere and take action, inshallah. So we're going to briefly look at some things to do with the fiqh of da'wah. So what is the call? What is the focus of the call? the message. We've already discussed this. We know what this is, but let's just refresh it. What is the focus of the call? What are we calling to?
Call people to Allah.
We're calling to Allah. Yep. And what we're calling people specifically to do? To worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Worship their one creator. So I'm not going to go over these specific ayat, inshallah. So just a quick note on this. The call is not to your own culture, imam, race, community, group, desires, political ideologies, some aspects of Islam like i.e. hijab or not eating pork, right? So the point here is sometimes in the da'wah what we end up doing is we end up getting involved in discussions, trivial discussions, especially from their perspective. Remember, they're non-Muslim. They don't even believe in Allah. They don't even know who their creator is. They don't even know why they were created in the first place. So to go into specific topics, from their perspective, this is beyond trivial. This is irrelevant for them, right? They need to first know who their creator is, right? And why they were created by him, right? They need to establish that relationship first. When they become Muslim, and then you start supporting them and developing them, then you can start teaching them the specifics, inshallah, right? So that's something to keep in mind. The call is with basira. We mentioned this already. As we know in the Quran, chapter 12, say, O Prophet, this is my way. I invite to Allah with insight. I and those who follow me, glory be to Allah, and I am not one of the polytheists. So basira, insight is key, right? Again, we mentioned this earlier. Only speak about things you know about clearly. Don't go into discussions or topics that you don't know about. If you don't know, say you don't know and get them in touch with someone that does, or get the information for them. Another very key, important principle that we need to keep in mind is our duty is to convey, not to convert. Guidance comes from Allah. Okay, this is a very, very important point. Again, we may think it's simple, but a lot of times when we get involved in the dawah, a lot of brothers get caught up on the shahada tally mentality. Yeah, like I got this many shahadas this year, I got this many shahadas in a decade, and we get caught up in this. And then when we're giving dawah to someone and they don't accept what we're saying, they don't become Muslim, we start becoming disheartened. We just start losing motivation. We start losing the passion. We start to feel like I'm not good enough. I can't do this, right? There is no direct correlation between good da'wah and the outcome, right? Good da'wah does not equal shahadas. There's no direct correlation here, right? Good da'wah is if you're sincere and you're clear and you talk about things you know and you convey what needs to be conveyed fundamentally to these people about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and about Islam, right? It's not about the outcome. That's with Allah, right? The best dalil I can give you for this is from the story of Nuh alayhi salam. How many years did Nuh alayhi salam give da'wah for? 950? Yeah. Now 950. We can't even begin to imagine that. Yeah. Most of us here are probably not older than 30, 40 years old, probably. Yeah. Imagine 950 years. Right? It's such a long period of time. And how did Nuh alayhi salam give da'wah? Did he leave anything? Did he leave any sort of way? He tried everything. Privately, publicly, night, day, anytime, every time of the day. How did his people respond? They would stick their fingers in their ears. They would consider him a crazy old person. Right? Most rejected him. How many people accepted Islam with Nuh alayhi salam? Handful, right? Not many. Handful. I don't know the exact figure, but a few people. Now let me ask you a question. Was Nuh alayhi salam successful or unsuccessful in his mission?
Successful.
He was absolutely successful. Right? Absolutely successful. So what does that tell us? Success in the da'wah does not mean you get loads of shahadas. Right? This is a false notion. Success in the da'wah is with Allah. Are you sincere? Are you delivering the message clearly? If you're doing that, leave the rest to Allah. It's not up to you how many people accept, how many shahadas you get. Even if you get 0, it doesn't matter. Your reward is in conveying the message clearly. Inshallah, if they accept and Allah makes you the means, then inshallah there's more reward for you. But just because that doesn't happen, it doesn't mean you're not successful in your da'wah. Right? So very important to keep in mind so we don't lose motivation. So the key characteristics of the caller, sincerity obviously, goes without saying. Sincerity is the bedrock. If you're not sincere, then there's nothing in it for you except destruction. Right? So sincerity is the fundamental thing. And trust me, when it comes to the da'wah, your sincerity is the thing that's really going to be challenged. It's really going to be put to the test. Because da'wah is always a public facing action. It's always going to be a public-facing action. Even if you speak to one person in a closed room, there's another person there. It's always public-facing. That means your sincerity is going to be tested. Right? And I know, again, I can tell you from experience of many brothers and my own personal experiences from about a decade ago, where you can easily lose your way if you're not staying on top of yourself and your relationship and your connection with Allah. And you're not continuously reminding yourself of what you're doing and why you're doing it. You can easily lose your way. No matter how pious you may consider yourself to be, you can still easily lose your way. Right? So you have to stay on top of sincerity, and that doesn't mean just making your intention once, like it's 2022, I made my intention today, and for the next 10 years you don't think about it. You have to continuously renew your intention. Right? Every action you take a moment. Commonwealth is coming up now, right? Inshallah, some of you brothers are going to be involved in those activities, in that da'wah. Each time before you go out, individually, just take 5 minutes, sit there and ask yourself, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? You know? And if you ask yourself questions, you'll get the answers. And you have to be honest with yourself, because sometimes we could lie to ourselves as well. You know, I'm doing this for the sake of Allah, but really you're doing it for something else. You're doing it for recognition, you're doing it for popularity, or you're doing it for whatever the case is. Right? So you have to continuously stay on top of yourself. Another thing that I found that works really well, and some brothers have also done this as well, and which is, again, take some time out before you do any dawah activities, sit down and ask yourself, or remind yourself of who you are and who Allah is. Right? It's very important. Because a lot of times what happens with human beings, us, as we grow older and we think we're very independent, you know, we think we've always been like we are today. Right? We look in the mirror every morning and we see, you know, this grown adult and we think, SubhanAllah, I've always been like this. Yeah, but what's the reality? What's our reality? You know, Allah reminds us of this throughout the Quran. If we were to rewind the tape back right now, right? Imagine I pressed the rewind button somehow and we rewinded, say, 40, 50 years back within a few seconds. What would happen to every single one of us? You start shrinking, right? You start getting smaller. You know, you'll go back in age. You become a baby. And then you become smaller, you become a fetus. And you become less than that. You become this dirty drop of fluid. That's our reality. خَلَقَ الْإِنسَانَ مِنْ نُطْفَةٍ. Allah created us from nutfah, right? We come from a dirty drop of fluid, and where are we going in another couple of years? Where are we going? Into the dirt. So look at the reality of our existence, brothers. We're sandwiched between two states of dirt. We come from something dirty and we go into something dirty, into the earth. That's our reality. And for some strange reason, we find ourselves deluded in our lives thinking that, yeah, I'm something. You know, I'm something great. I'm something powerful. Yeah, I'm going to give dawah. I'm going to look like I'm the, you know, the alpha male. I'm this very amazing brother that everyone looks up to. It's all nonsense. You may get a bit of an ego boost. What's going to happen after that? Then you're going to look for your next dose of ego boost. It's like a drug. You know, you're chasing the high. It's going to burn you out. You're going to end up destroying yourself. You're going to achieve nothing by doing this. Absolutely nothing. But if we do this sincerely for the sake of Allah, reminding ourselves, I'm nothing, I come from nothing, I'm going into nothing. You know, and Allah's given me this short opportunity in this life. You know, and remind yourself, I mean, how many people on the surface of this earth right now? Anyone know? 3.7 billion or something, human beings? 6.5 billion, yeah? And out of 6.5 billion, how many are Muslim? 1.8%? Yeah, something, I don't know, something like, say 2%, 3%, whatever the case is. Now of the 3%, how many are practicing? How many has Allah blessed to understand the value of being a practicing Muslim? Maybe what, 5% of that? 10% of that? Right? And now of that 10%, how many have recognized the importance of giving da'wah? Maybe 0.5%? Yeah? Look at the opportunity Allah has given us. Really think about that. It's the greatest job any human being can ever do. Literally. You know, I don't care if you're the CEO of Apple or Samsung. Their job is pale in comparison to the job of da'wah. It is the greatest job on the surface of this earth that ever exists. And Allah is giving us an opportunity to do it. Insignificant. We're insignificant in the grand scheme of things. We're nothing in comparison to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So why not make the most of this opportunity? At least show gratitude for this opportunity. How do we show gratitude? Allah, I'm going to do whatever I can in the da'wah, and I'm going to do it sincerely for your sake. Not going to do it for myself, not going to do it for an ego boost, etc. So the point is reminding yourself of these things, whatever works for you, but take the time to do that. Right? We don't take time these days before we act. We just do things, right? It's almost like, especially when you're from London, I don't know if things are different in Birmingham, but it's just go, go, go. It's non-stop. Yeah, people don't stop and think. You know, when the COVID kicked in a few years ago, and people were forced to stop, you know how many people went crazy? The rates of depression went through the roof. The rates of consumption of Prozac and antidepressants went through the roof because people didn't know what to do with themselves. They didn't know who they were. They didn't know why they existed. You know, they went crazy just because they had to sit down and think. Right? People can't do that. So, and we unfortunately, we also as Muslims, we're not exempt from this. We also live in this environment and it affects us too. But it's good to always stop and think, why am I doing something? What is my intention behind this? And inshallah, these things will help us. Sincerity is key, brothers. Inshallah. Knowledge and clarity, we mentioned this already. This is a beautiful narration of Ali radiallahu anhu. He said, speak to the people according to their level of understanding. Do you wish that Allah and His Messenger be rejected? It's a very powerful statement, right? And the reason I mention this is because, again, when we go through this GORAP method, inshallah, which will start after Dhuhr, is when we learn something new, we want to go out and convey that something new to people as we learn it, right? And we completely disregard that person's level, that person's, capacity, because people are on different levels out there. There are some very simple people, and then you'll have the so-called professors, right? Everyone's different. You have to assess each person. When you give da'wah, assess the person, see what their level is. It doesn't mean one is better than the other. It just means everyone is different. And then speak to them on their level. Inshallah. What's the time, brothers? 1:15? 20 past 1. Should we break now, Brother Zakim, or should we go for another 5 minutes?
5 minutes would be okay.
Yeah? Okay, we'll wrap up. Wrap up at 5. 1:30, I think, isn't it? Okay, inshallah. So, keep things on a level where people understand. Patience is another key characteristic of someone giving da'wah. You will be challenged. You will be put into certain situations where you get agitated, annoyed. If you can't control your temper, then don't go out there and give da'wah. Right? Don't make a mess of the da'wah if you can't control yourself. Right? There'll be someone else will be out there doing it. But if you can't control your temper, and genuinely some people have a problem, yeah, then see what other areas of da'wah you can get involved in, which is not public facing, where you'll be put in a situation where you're going to lose control, right? But it's a good thing to always, everyone has a temper, right? Everyone has that side. It's always good to see how you can control yourself, right? And this will reflect in other areas of your life as well, with family, friends, etc., inshallah, right? So really you have to be patient with people, because people, you'll come across all sorts. You'll come across people that want to challenge you, the nasty atheist types. You'll maybe come across some staunch Christians, right, who are not making sense in any way, but they just want to hold on to what they believe, right? So you have to be patient with people. Kindness and gentleness goes without saying. The Prophet was gentle with his companions. We know the Prophet ﷺ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, mentions this in the Quran, that if he was harsh towards his companions, what would happen? They would leave, they would disperse. Now think about it, this is the Prophet ﷺ, the human with the best characteristics. If he was harsh, the companions would have left. Now imagine if we're harsh with people, what's going to happen? Absolutely, they're going to leave. They're not going to want to be around us. Yeah? So you have to be gentle in your approach, manners, etiquettes, character, all of these things, keep these in mind, right? How you conduct yourself. The importance of this, best dalil for this is in the story of Musa alayhi salam, right? Who does Allah send Musa to? Fir'aun. Right? So think about it, Allah is sending one of the best of human beings, as our scholars have told us, one of the best of human beings to one of the worst of human beings. Now we know what was Musa alayhi salam's personality. He was very strong, right? His personality is very strong. Physically he was strong as well, mashallah, yeah? And how does Allah advise Musa before he sends him to Fir'aun? What's the last piece of advice Allah gives Musa alayhi salam? Yeah, speak to him gently. Qawlan layyina. Soft, gentle speech. This is one of the worst of human beings. Why does Allah tell him to have soft, gentle speech? So that what may happen?
His heart softens.
Sorry?
His heart softens.
Yeah, so that he may essentially come to the truth, inshallah. Yeah. The point is that we learn something very powerful here, brothers, which is the way you conduct yourself is going to have a big impact on the person you speak to. Right? Your characteristics, your manners are as important as what you say. If you get that combination right, we've got the truth, now you present the truth in the right way, that's going to have a far greater impact than just sharing the truth in any way you like, being aggressive towards people, etc. Right? I'm going to share a quick story with you and then we'll break for salah. And this story, inshallah, is going to help you retain this point. A sheikh once told me, he said, there was a poor guy in a village, a very simple man in a village, right? And he had an earache one day. So he went to the doctor in the village. And the doctor basically looked into his ear and he had an ear infection. So what does the doctor prescribe? Antibiotics, right? So he said, look, here's antibiotics, take this 7 days, 3 times a day, morning, afternoon, and evening, and you'll be better. Now the guy goes away and he comes back the next day. And he says, doctor, the pain is getting worse. So the doctor's thinking now, this guy's a simple village guy, he probably didn't understand what I said. He said, take this for 7 days. He reminded him again. 7 days, morning, afternoon, and evening, and you'll be better. So he goes away. Guess what he does the 3rd day? Comes back again. He says, doctor, the pain is getting even more worse. It's just getting really bad now. Now the doctor's thinking, it's been 3 days. The antibiotics should have been kicking in by now. Right? So the doctor takes another look inside his ear. And guess what he finds in his ear? Antibiotics stuffed inside his ear. Right? And the moral of the story, the sheikh said, was that the medicine is only effective if it's administered properly. Right? Antibiotics are supposed to be taken orally. If you're sticking them in your ear, it's not going to help you, it's going to make the problem worse. Right? So the medicine is only effective if it's administered properly. How does this relate to the da'wah? The message is only going to be effective if you deliver it properly. You are that delivery mechanism. Right? You are that capsule. If you don't deliver the message properly, it's not going to have the desired impact. Right? We want to speak to the hearts of people, not just out there to batter them or debate them and just win a debate. Right? So we'll break here, brothers, inshallah. And after salah, we'll come back and we'll carry on. Okay, brothers, we're going to continue, inshallah, and sisters. Before the break, we left off on what point? What point was it? Sincerity, yeah, we touched upon sincerity. What was the general sort of key points, if you were to summarize them, of the first session? Yes, brother.
What you need to have before you start even doing da'wah, like what
Yep.
you're looking between yourself and everything, etc. As well as what you're kind of looking for, like purpose of da'wah, etc.
Yep, okay, so I don't want the etceteras, I want to know the details. Who can give me the details, inshallah? Yes, bro, his friend.
How to conduct yourself when you're actually giving da'wah in terms of like your character.
Okay, so your characteristics. Who could tell me some of the characteristics?
Honest, like online, can't make
Don't lie, be honest, yep. If you don't know, say you don't know.
like keep the pride down a minimum. So let's just say if you don't know the answer to something,
Just be humble, say you don't know, but you'll find out for them, yep.
Gentleness.
Gentleness, yep. What else? Patience, good.
don't have a temper basically.
Yeah, don't have a temper, yep. Anything else? Yep.
Don't focus on parts, like the small parts of Islam. Focus on like the basic fundamentals of like one.
Yeah, fundamentals. Because why? Why should we focus on the fundamentals of the non-Muslims?
The most important.
Yep. Why is it important for them? Why is it important for them that we focus on the fundamentals, not on the other stuff?
I think you're highlighting part of the da'wah is going to be not just about the things that you say, also the mannerism that you portray in it. So that's
Yep.
the reason why you highlight that.
Yeah, I don't think it links to this point, but yes, brother.
Would you say if they're not interested in some of the smaller details, they're interested in more holistic and wider approaches?
Yeah, that could be the case. So they're not interested, but there's a fundamental reason why we don't want to go into the... Yes, Sheikh.
It's because the fundamental reason is they're associating partner with Allah. And we have to convey this clearly.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the fundamental of the deen. They need to know who Allah is first and foremost. That they were created to worship Allah. They need to take the shahada. They need to accept that reality. Then everything else becomes relevant for them. I've seen brothers spending 2 hours, 3 hours with a non-Muslim covering the fiqh of fasting, right? And they've left. And they've not left any better knowing who Allah is, who the Prophet ﷺ was, what the purpose of their life is, what the Quran is. They have no clue. right? So teaching non-Muslims about the details, specifically from a dawah context, makes no sense, right? It's not effective dawah, right? If I was to give you a hypothetical scenario, imagine you speak to a non-Muslim, you spend an hour with him, and you explain all of the details behind the hijab. Why do women cover their head, right? They leave, and on the way home, they get hit by a bus, and they die. Are they in any better position now as prior to speaking to you? No. Yeah, we haven't given them effective dawah. So all of those things are trivial. We need to focus on the fundamentals with them, which is who is Allah, who is the Prophet ﷺ, what is the purpose of life, what is the Quran. Right? These are the key core concepts we need to get across to them in the dawah. Right? Now, moving on, before we get to this, one more section I want to quickly cover is to do with the fitrah. Now, what is the fitrah?
Natural disposition.
Natural disposition. Let's explain that now. What do we mean by natural disposition? Yes, brother.
A natural inclination to believe in Allah.
Okay, an inclination. Yep, we can say it's an inclination to believe in Allah. Anyone else?
The born is a Muslim.
You're born with the fitrah, yeah, which is the pure fitrah every child is born upon, which inclines towards Islam, absolutely. What else? Anything else? So it's
It's the default state.
yeah, it's a default. So it's our nature, right? So one key point we should also keep in mind, because generally when we go out and we go to school in the West and we go through secular education, there is a principle they teach. They may not teach it verbally, but it's instilled within people through education, which is that you are a blank slate. You're born a blank slate, right? You're born a blank slate. It's called tabula rasa. That's what they refer to as a blank slate, meaning that there's no prior knowledge. You come completely blank, and then you acquire knowledge through life. So when you go through life, you experience things, you go through education, you learn knowledge, right? That's the idea they're trying to push, right? And they have their reasons for it. But from an Islamic perspective, we know humans aren't born blank slates. There is a fitrah. Now, the scholars have had different opinions in regards to how do you now define the fitrah? Is it knowledge embedded within the soul? Or is it a inclination that's there towards the truth of the oneness of Allah, right? But that's whichever view you take, it's fine. What's relevant here is that the fitrah is there. There's either an inclination to the recognition of the oneness of Allah and that He deserves worship, or that it's a part of the fitrah, it's a part of the human soul. Some of the scholars link this to the passage in the Quran where Allah brought forth us from Adam. He brought us out of his loins, and He asked us, am I not your Rabb? Am I not your Lord? And what did we testify? Well, yes, we testified yes. And it was at that moment, the scholars say, that reality that Allah is our Rabb was embedded within the soul. Now when we say Rabb, it doesn't just mean creator. It doesn't just mean that Allah is our creator. What does the word Rabb also mean? Nurturer, yeah. What else? Sustainer. Provider, the one that gives us everything. We can't exist without Him. Right? So when you recognize this, what's the natural conclusion for an intelligent human being? Who should the human worship or submit to? Allah. And not to anything or anyone else. So this reality was embedded within the fitrah. Now, where is the fitrah? Is there a part of the spiritual heart, the soul? We don't need to get into those details, right? All we need to realize from our perspective today is that the fitrah is there. We're not blank slates, right? The Prophet ﷺ said every child is born upon the fitrah. But it's his parents that make him a Jew, a Christian, or a Magian, fire worshipper, right? Now, what do we learn from this? Children are born upon the fitrah, this natural state. Now, a part of this natural state is to recognize the oneness of Allah and that He deserves worship. Interestingly, you can support this now as well. There's some really interesting research that's been done by some scientists who study children, the child psychologists. There's one guy called Justin L. Barrett, and there's a lady named Olivera Petrovich. They've both written several books on this topic. And Olivera Petrovich, she's an atheist herself. But what they're both concluding is that children have this natural tendency to believe in a cause, these causal relationships, that they believe in a creator. It's something that develops naturally within children. And to teach them otherwise, you have to do a lot of effort. It's taught knowledge. Right? So this concept of the fitrah is being supported by what science is showing us as well today, although it's just supporting evidence. I wouldn't use that all the time to say, look, therefore it's true. No, we know it's true because it comes from Allah. Allah has informed us of these realities. But why is it relevant from a dawah perspective? What do you guys think? What's the link here? Why are we talking about the fitrah?
Bring people back to it.
Yes, we bring people back to it. Absolutely. So it's now what you know is we're not calling people to something new. We're not calling people to something that they have no knowledge of, right? We're actually just trying to awaken that truth within them, that reality that Allah has put within them. And when the fitrah, when the human is sound, their inner state is sound, Islam fits like a glove, right? It just fits like a glove. It's in line with human nature. So what we're trying to do is awaken that truth within them. How do we do that? We can do that through many different means. The GORAP method is one very powerful method. But like I said, you'll come across different people. Sometimes you come across someone that's probably just experienced a tragedy in their life. So in that case, you don't want to start, like if someone says, I used to believe in God, but I stopped believing in God because when my mum died. Now if you say, okay, that's interesting, let me give you a logical argument for God's existence. It's not going to, they're going to feel like you're not listening to them. Right? They probably just need to connect the dots better. We all die. Life is a test. They just need something from the Quran like that. They don't need logical arguments. Because they've told you, they stopped believing because of the death of their mother. They didn't stop believing because they didn't have rational arguments. Right? So address the problem. And there's different things that will trigger the fitrah for different people. Experiences can trigger the fitrah in some people. Allah mentions in the Quran where people are at sea. Right? And high waves come over them. Right? Fishermen, imagine they're at sea. High waves are coming over them. Their boat is rocking. They don't know if they're going to survive. What do? They call out to Allah in sincere faith. Right? And then when Allah brings them safely back to land, what happens? Human nature, man, subhanAllah. Allah brings them to safety and only a few of them remain on the truth. They all turn away. And that's why calamities sometimes are a means to trigger the fitrah. And therefore hardships and trials, this whole problem of evil nonsense that's out there these days, yeah? Oh, problem of evil, if God exists, why is the evil and suffering? Well, here's one wisdom. Humans need a slap sometimes to wake up. That's the reality of human beings. Right? And I think about suffering from the perspective of Islam. If Allah puts you through a trial or tribulation, and that trial or tribulation wakes you up to the reality of Allah, helps you turn back to Allah, because that's what trials do many times. How many Muslims haven't practiced all their life, something bad happens, they lose their job, calamity, and they turn back to Allah. They become the most pious worshippers. Right? So if that trial brings you back to Allah, then in the grand scheme of things, is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's a good thing, because it's going to save us in this life and in the hereafter. Right? But the problem is the non-Muslim, the atheist, they have a very narrow perspective of looking at the world. For them, this is the only life that exists. You only live once. Right? So they want to make the most of this life. They want to do as much as they can. So whenever a trial comes their way, they just can't make sense of it. But Islamically, we can make a lot of sense of it. We'll probably touch upon it more in the Q&A, inshallah. So the fitrah is there. Now, dawah downfalls we don't need to cover. Uncomfortable questions I'm going to quickly touch upon. This is another sort of key concept we need to understand. How many of you have had a conversation with a non-Muslim before? A dawah conversation? Okay, how many of you that have had a conversation, it's been that they have approached you and not you approaching them? Okay, normally that's most of the time what's the case is. A non-Muslim will come up to you. Now, what type of questions did they ask you? And if someone hasn't spoken to a non-Muslim, I'm sure you've heard stories of someone that's spoken to a non-Muslim and they've been asked certain questions. What type of questions? And I specifically want uncomfortable questions. Yeah. LGBT, good. It's a good start. What specifically about LGBT?
Why is Islam against homosexuality?
Yeah, okay, good. So why is Islam against homosexuality? What else?
The Prophet and the marriages.
The Prophet ﷺ's marriages, yep.
Islam, terrorism.
Islam and terrorism, what else? Inheritance, yep. Inequality in inheritance, yep. Hijab, yep.
Probably not the most pressing of issues, but why do men get to marry four?
Yeah, absolutely. Why do men get to marry 4 women and women can't do the same? Yep.
Suicide killings.
Suicide killings, yep.
Why are so many people why is Islam forbidding so much? Why is everything haram?
Yeah, why is everything forbidden? Yep.
The ayat of war in the Quran.
Yeah, the ayat of war. Yep.
What are the punishments for the hudud, where someone was to do zina, for example? Or
Okay, so the penal code, the punishments in Islam, the hudud, in your law, why is it so barbaric? Yeah. What else? Yes.
ISIS and slavery and
Yep. ISIS, slavery. Yep.
Why is there so much evil if God exists?
Yeah. Problem of evil. Yeah. Some of these are ridiculous questions. Obviously, they just don't know where they, don't know how Islam explains these things. But some of them, they're genuinely curious. They'll ask you these questions, right? Now, who's been in that type of situation? Quite a few of us. Okay. So I want one brother. We need to do a little role play, inshallah. So any volunteers?
Yeah, I don't mind.
Okay. I want someone that does mind. I don't want you to be comfortable. The brother next to you, bro, you stand up, inshallah. Yes, you there, bro. The brother to your left. Yeah, you yourself. Yeah. Bismillah. Yeah, just stand up there, bro. If that doesn't make you uncomfortable enough, you can come down here, bro. Okay. All right. So this is inshallah for the benefit of everyone. It's just a role play. So imagine you're at a stall. The Commonwealth Games have started. You're at a dawah stall outside on one of the high streets, and I come over to you to your stall to ask you some questions. Yeah. Okay. So what are you doing today?
We're role playing right now.
Yeah, we're role playing. We started. Yeah. So what are you doing right now? What's your name?
My name's Mohammed.
Mohammed. Very common name. Yeah, very common name. I could have almost guessed that. But what's these materials on the table?
We're just trying to. Sorry.
It's funny.
No, it's not funny. We're just trying to bring light to some of the issues that revolve around Islam and the misconceptions that we
Okay.
make a clarity about.
That's good. So you're an expert. That's good. So
I've got some knowledge to try help, try guide you to that.
yeah. So I've got some questions. All right. Okay. I've got some questions. We'll try it and see how you go. Yeah. So I was watching a BBC documentary the other day. And they were showing that women in Saudi have to cover themselves, even everywhere, even here, you can see down the high street, they have to cover their heads and they have to wear these black cloaks and everything. And you're standing there with a nice short sleeve t-shirt on, because it's very hot as well outside. How is that fair? Why are you doing that to your women?
When it comes to men and women, they don't have to do the same things to be equal. Some things women can do, some things men can do, some things both of them can't do, which the other one does.
Okay.
But we don't base equality on doing the same thing. We base it on...
So what is it based on? If equality is not based on the same thing, what is it based on?
It's based on the value that a certain action has and like the wisdom behind it.
So what's the wisdom behind covering your women when it's 40 degrees outside? And you can wear a t-shirt and walk around. Why don't you cover yourself as well? Just from an ethical perspective.
When it comes to men, they can't deal with certain desires and certain emotions as well.
So what, the temperature is a desire for men, so they have to uncover and...
The fact that they might see certain things on a woman that might make them...
Oh, okay. So it's a problem for you, that's why you force the women to cover, to take care of you, basically.
It's a protection for both of us in a sense.
So not only is it inequality, it's also to help you out further, basically. So you don't have a problem, they have to cover so much in the hot weather.
My colleagues, yeah, inshallah.
Your colleagues are just sleeping. Okay, let's try another one. I've got another question for you. Sisters, okay. So yeah, let me ask you another question. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so you guys have an issue with LGBTQ and stuff. Why? Why don't you let people do what they want to do?
We don't have an issue with it per se.
Oh, you don't have a problem?
It's just something that's not permissible in our religion. But people can do what they want to do. But if you do it if you're a Muslim, you've got to abide by the rules that have been set for Muslims. So if you practice that within the religion, and obviously there's certain things as well, you can't just say that person's gay and then that's it, we go for them. There's certain ways of going about it. There's got to be...
Okay, so you don't just go for them, but there's a way you go for them, basically.
There's not a way that we go for them, but like to prove someone's gay and to like, go through everything else that comes after that, there's certain procedures and steps and protocols that go.
Okay, so say if all the steps and procedures are met, then you will go for them.
We won't go for them.
So what would you do then?
Hostile way. It depends what the context is. It depends what's happening.
Oh, so based on context, you'll either go for them or do something else.
No, I would just say go for them.
Okay, so
go for them with the,
yeah, but you know, when I was reading your holy book, you know, in there's a passages where, you know, there were people in the past who had these tendencies, which are natural tendencies, and they were punished for this.
how were they punished? You know how they were punished? Did you say?
Stones, I think, from the sky.
They were stoned from the sky.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, your God doesn't like this act, and you saying you like it or you don't like it as well.
I don't have enough knowledge to answer based on what you just said.
Okay, so that's fine. All right, Jazakallah khair. Sit down, brother. Thank you. I don't want to torture you anymore. May Allah bless you, bro. Yeah. So the point is, and obviously these were some extreme examples, yeah, and I was really pressing him, but you will get people like this, and if you can deal with that situation, you can deal with any other situation. Yeah. So if you can deal with the worst case scenario possible, then anything less than that is easy, inshallah. Yeah. So let me get your analysis on this. What was happening in that conversation? Who's leading the conversation? Yeah. What was the brother doing? He's defending. Was he trying to answer the questions? Yeah. Some of it, yeah. And then at some point he said, I can't answer it. Yeah. Okay. Now here's the problem with this. There's a couple of issues I want to highlight. When you get into that situation, even if you know how to articulate the answers to those questions really well, and you still try to answer them, you're still going to have a problem. Right? Because what's going to happen is you answer one question, they're going to have another question. You answer another question, they're going to have a third question. Right? And they're never going to be fully satisfied. Now, there's a reason they're not going to be fully satisfied. Okay? And here's the reason. Everyone has worldviews. Okay? Everyone has a lens through which they look at reality. Every human does. As Muslims, we have our own lens. What is our lens? Islam. We know who Allah is. Yeah? We know what revelation is. We know who the Prophet ﷺ was. That is our lens. So we see right and wrong through the lens of Islam. That's how we perceive the world. That's how we understand the world. The non-Muslims out there, they have their own lenses. They have their own perspective, worldview. Right? Because if you don't have a worldview, you can't function in the world. You need to have a perspective point. Right? You have to have a point from which you have your own perspective. Their lens could be, they have many different lenses today. It could be liberalism, it could be secularism, it could be atheism, it could be naturalism, it could be feminism. It could be a combination of these different isms, right? So there's many different lenses. Now they are looking at the world through their lens. Now whatever you say, however well you articulate the answers to these questions, from their perspective it's never going to make sense. Take for example a liberal, right? A secular liberal individual. They have a certain conception on equality between men and women, okay? Their conception of equality is totally different from our conception of equality. And their conception of equality is flawed from many different perspectives. Yeah? But we don't need to get into it. The point is that they have their own perspective. Now when, say the brother knew how to really, and he did a good job, mashallah, but say he even did an even better job at articulating why women have to cover a certain way and men cover a certain way. From their narrative, their worldview, they'll never appreciate it. Because from their lens, equality is what? Absolutely equal. Right? With a few nuances. So I'm going to give you an analogy, guys, now to really drive this point home about worldviews. This screen you see right now in front of you, right? You've got a slide on it, but imagine it's blank and it's white. Yeah, it's just a white blank page. Now you're sitting here and every single one of you is wearing clear glasses. That's your lens, clear glasses. Now when you look at the screen, what color do you see it? White. Why do you see it as white? Your lenses are clear. Right? So you can see the color of the screen, actually what the color is. Now imagine I walk into the room and I'm wearing glasses, but my glasses have red tints on them. They're red colored tints on the glasses. Now when I look at the wall, what color do I see? Red. Now, you guys can spend all day trying to convince me that the wall is white. But is that going to be effective? No, why not? Yeah, because I see red through my lenses. My lenses are tinted red, so I'm seeing red. So in that scenario, what's the best thing to do? Yeah, not pull them off, not take them, not force them off, but encourage me to take my glasses off and put on the clear glasses. As soon as I put the clear glasses on and I look at the board, what color do I see? White. Do you have to convince me anymore? No. So this is what I'm getting at. See the worldviews as lenses. We have a lens of Islam. They have different lenses. Therefore, no matter how well we articulate answers to them about certain questions in Islam, they will never appreciate it. So what we need to do in the dawah is we need to try to encourage them to take off their glasses, even if it's momentary, take off their glasses and put the clear pair of glasses on. Does that make sense? Yeah. Now, how do we do this practically, right? That's what we're going to get into, inshallah. Okay. Forget these. We don't need these. I'm going to give you guys the sort of overview of how to sort of articulate this. Now, say John comes to the table on during the Dawah days when you're doing the games, right? And John says, oh, you know, I see you guys out here. Let me ask you guys a question. I've been seeing these documentaries. Why do women have to cover their heads? Okay. So what do we do in this scenario? How do we take control and give them what they need, not what they want? First, acknowledge them. John, that's a brilliant question. Thank you for asking me that question, right? So thank them for asking the question. Because as soon as you thank them, they're going to feel like they've done something right? And they're going to become more comfortable and have a good discussion with you. You know, it's going to change their demeanor. So thank them. John, I really appreciate it. Thank you for asking me the question. However, John, before I answer that question for you, if you have a couple of minutes, let's sit down and let me share some of the foundations of Islam with you first. Okay, so I'm going to repeat that again so it's clear, right? And you can put this in your own words. You don't have to do it like me. John comes, why do women cover their hair? John, that's a brilliant question. Acknowledge them first. That's a brilliant question, John. Thank you for asking the question. But John, before I answer that question or help you with that question, if you have a couple of minutes, let's sit down, let me get you a cup of coffee, and let me share some of the foundations of Islam with you first. Why? If you ask the why question, well, John, because once you understand the foundations, you'll better be able to understand the answers to your questions. Right? So see what you've done. Number one, you've taken control of the conversation. Right? Now you're going to give them what they want, what they need, as opposed to what they want. Right? Number two, now that you're going to be talking about the foundations of Islam, you're going to give them the right lenses. Right? When you give them the right lenses, inshallah, I've noticed this time and again, by the end of the conversation, when you say, okay, do you want the answer to your previous question? Many times they already know why we do what we do as Muslims now. Right? And they don't, even if they can't understand it from their perspective, they can understand it from our perspective. Right? And sometimes they don't even care anymore about that question. Right? So, John, thank you for asking the question. If you have a couple of minutes before I answer your question, let's sit down and let me share some of the foundations of Islam with you first. Now, some people may say we're evading the question, right? We're just ignoring the question. No, we're not. Because remember, the dawah is very specific. It's not about just answering every question someone has. We have limited time with people. We're going to give them what they need first, and then we'll give them what they want. And in giving them what they need, we're also giving them the right lenses, right? And we're doing effective dawah. Because the foundations, what makes up the lens is what they need from a dawah perspective. That's what they need for them to make an educated, conscious decision as to whether they want to become Muslim or not. Right? So is everyone following? Any questions on this? Yes, brother.
So if you do come across an individual who asks you a particular question,
yeah.
whether it's about LGBT, why Muslim sisters coming, etc., and you ask them, can I explain this? They say, no, I want an answer for this first.
Yeah.
How would you deal with that?
So good. So you will get those scenarios. So you say to them, that's a good question, I'll answer it, but I need to share the foundations with you first. And they say, no, I want an answer to my question. Say, look, I know you want an answer to your question. I'm going to help you with it. But trust me, you need to understand some of the foundations first before I give you the answer, because they'll give you context. Right? And if they still keep pressing, and then, if they get to the point where they're still doing this, then in most cases, they're there just to debate with you and argue with you. They don't really want answers. Because if someone genuinely wants to answer the question, and they genuinely understand that for them to understand the answer to the question, they need to understand some of the foundations, they shouldn't have a problem. Right? Even if they're in a rush, they can say, I don't have time now, but let's exchange details. Right? But stand firm. Don't let them sway you. Yeah? Or don't let them overpower you. Say, just because it's important. They need to realize this. Right? Now, sometimes you may get crazy questions. Okay? So, for example, John may come and say, I heard that you guys want to kill our babies. Something ridiculous like this. What do you do in that scenario? Now, you don't want to say, John, that's a brilliant question. I'd love to answer it for you. Because you're acknowledging the question, right? That there's some validity to that question. No. In such scenarios, if it's a crazy question, say, John, that has nothing to do with Islam. Straight away dismiss it. John, that has nothing to do with Islam. However, you may have other questions. So if you have a couple of minutes, let's sit down and let me share some of the foundations of Islam with you. So again, you're doing the same thing, right? So it's very easy once you start doing it. When you practice this a couple of times, it'll become very easy. Actually, you know what? Let's take 2 minutes and with the person next to you, practice this. So someone play John and then swap over. Yeah, so 2 minutes, just practice it with the person next to you, inshallah. Because this is the most important thing, guys. And sisters as well, do the same. Okay, who felt they had a really good exchange? Okay, you two stand up, brothers, inshallah. So, yeah, come forward, come down here, inshallah, please. So who's playing John?
So we were both actually John. So
oh, you're both John. That's convenient, isn't it? Okay, so you switched, okay.
Yeah.
So one of you do the John and one of you do the other guy, inshallah.
I'll do John.
Yeah. Just put the mic towards him as well when he's playing.
I see you feel about gays, can you just let people do what they want? What's your obsession with these people?
Okay, we don't hate gays, but anyway, in order for you to understand what Islam has to say about those issues, what Islam has to say about those issues, let me go back to the foundation of Islam so you get a better understanding.
No, I want an answer.
You'll get your answer, but in order for you to understand first, you have to understand from the foundational point of view of Islam, like, what we have to say about those issues.
That's fair.
So we have to go
That's
back.
still my question.
Yeah, you'll get the answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fine.
Brilliant. That was excellent, mashallah. Really good. And if you notice, the one thing we need to know is the brother was very confident. He was almost like, okay, fine. He was expecting it. It's okay. So expect these things, right? And just stand your ground. Don't shift from that. You know it's important. That's what you're taking them. What you're giving them is what's important. You'll answer their question, inshallah, right? And he was, you can tell that John was quite paranoid, yeah, that he wasn't going to get an answer, yeah. So he wanted to get agreement. Just if it takes you confirming it with them and reassuring them you're going to get an answer, just do that. It's fine, right? As long as you get them to the point where they're willing to have a discussion, inshallah. Okay, and this is the most important key, guys. This one little technique would, change your dawah perspective completely, because this will show. Look, what does this mean now? Do you need to know every answer to every single question in Islam, or how to articulate every single answer? No. You need to know the basics. If you can do this technique, you can give dawah to everyone, inshallah. Right? And that's the most important thing. The dawah isn't about convincing people or articulating all of these deep, sort of philosophically designed answers so people understand and they appreciate what you're saying. It's about giving them the foundations, inshallah. Okay, so now the second scenario is that's if someone approaches you. Yes, brother?
Just one question is that, if you're looking at trying to bring everything back to sort of reasons why or some of the principles,
Yep.
it's going to be a very long conversation. You have to try and get through quite a lot before, if you want to answer that question or not answer that question, or the specific question that's asked. There's a lot of material you have to get through. So in your experience, how long did it take to sort of, let's have a sit-down conversation?
Yep. Yeah, GORAP, so
are you looking at 10 minutes, an hour, half an hour?
it's with the method itself. It could be, you can do it as short as 5-10 minutes, and you can do it longer as well, depending on how much time you have. So it's very flexible, right? So there's 4 points in the GORAP. G is for God's existence, O is for oneness, I is for revelation, and P is for prophethood. If you do it, if you do it quickly and not rush it too much, you can do it within 10 minutes, right? Or you can take longer, depending on how much time the person has, right? So it's very flexible from that perspective, and the key thing is, even if at the end of it, you may not even know the answer to their question, right? So at the end, you may just end up having to say to them, you may just say, look, I'm going to get you the answer to your question. I can tell you this much, but for the rest, I've got this friend, I'm going to get in contact with him and I'm going to get you the answer, right? The most important thing is giving them the foundations, which is who is Allah, His oneness, prophethood, revelation, right? So weigh it out depending on how much time you have with each person, inshallah, right? I know we have this, we may feel like they've asked the question and they deserve an answer, because many times people are genuine and they want an answer. But if we can appreciate that, if we give them this, in reality, this is what's going to help them understand the answer to their question better anyway. So we're just facilitating the original question anyway then, inshallah. Right? So see it as that. It's a facilitation of the answer to the original question. Right? Inshallah. Yeah.
How do you avoid going into a debate about Trinity and Tawheed? Because the base is the same.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
But then if you're trying to answer a different question from a Christian, a strong believer in Trinity,
yep.
They agree with God, they agree in the Messiah, Savior. So how do you deviate with it, or how do you actually get away from that scenario. No, the Bible is true. No, the Quran is more accurate.
Yeah.
Or the Quran is accurate.
Yeah.
And the Bible's got errors in it. So how do you...
Sheikh, we'll cover that in the oneness section. We're going to get there, inshallah. So, and when we get to Revelation, it will all make sense, because once you've established Revelation, then what Revelation says must be true. Okay, brother, inshallah. Yeah. So we'll get there, inshallah, definitely within the oneness section. Okay, the other way is, so if you are starting the conversation, right? So the first initiation is when someone approaches you. The other is when you are starting the conversation, you're handing out materials, etc. How do you do that? Now, base this on your own personality. Yes, some brothers are very extrovert, they're very confident in this way, they love talking to people, and they find it very easy to start up conversations. Yeah. Other brothers are a bit more shy, they're more reserved, right? Those that are more reserved and shy, don't try to do what the brothers that are not shy do, because it doesn't work well. Like me personally, the most difficult part for me in any dawah situation is starting the conversation, right? Because I don't find it that comfortable talking to new people, right? So for those brothers, what you can do is a simple thing. Just start handing out some leaflets, and you can ask simple questions like, do you know about Islam? Or do you believe in God? Or what is the purpose of life? Okay? There's another brother we know, I don't know if you guys have seen some of his videos, his name's Nadeem Ashraf. He basically, he's very confident in this way, because he has a background in sales. So he spent many years on street sales, right? So he can start a conversation, he'll compliment someone's tie, and he'll stop them and he'll start a conversation, yeah? So if you can do that, you naturally use that then. If Allah's blessed you like that, then use those abilities, okay? And obviously with the brothers only, not with the sisters, yeah? The women out there. So yeah, just keep it natural to yourself, but keep it simple. Hand out materials, ask simple questions, inshallah. And when we say you ask them the question, what's the purpose of life? If you ask them the question, then listen to what they have to say. Right? So they'll tell you an answer. Say, okay, that's very interesting. But from an Islamic perspective, we have our own version of the purpose of life. So if you have a couple of minutes, can I share some of the basics of Islam with you? So again, you could do something similar and take it to those foundational points, inshallah. Okay? But always listen to people. So just a summary of the sort of steps. Number one, character, right? Make sure your character is on point, you have good manners, you have a good way of conducting yourself. Concept is what we discussed. That's a brilliant question, but before I give you the answer, let me share some of the basics of Islam with you first. That's the concept here. Number three, get an agreement. And this is going to be key. We're going to be getting agreements throughout the whole GORAP. It's very important to keep in mind that it's a dialogue. It's not a monologue. You're speaking to someone. Right? I've seen many times where brothers learn the GORAP and sisters, and they go out and start speaking to non-Muslims, and they go from G to P, one shot straight, and they don't even listen, they don't even let the other person speak. And they get to the end and they're like, are you ready for the Shahada? And the person's like, I didn't even agree with the first thing you said. Right? So you don't want to be in that situation. Every step of the way, stop, ask them, does that make sense? Do you agree? If they say no, ask them what you don't agree with, and then clarify things for them, inshallah. Okay? So getting agreement is very important. We've done crazy questions. So let's get to, we don't need to do common sense. Okay, let's get to God's existence. So now you've sat John down, John's agreed, okay, you got a couple of minutes, he has a couple of minutes, he's going to sit down with you. Yes, brother?
Just going back a bit, rewind 30 seconds.
Yeah.
You said we don't have any conversation with ladies.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying don't be too, excessive in your approach with ladies. Yeah, just keep it under, keep it under control, right? Keep it Islamically civil, inshallah. Yeah, that's what I was saying, inshallah. Yeah, just to clarify, this is Jazakallah khair, brother. So God's existence. How would you guys prove God's existence? That's happened once, you know that. Wallahi, I'll share a quick. You reminded me. I'll share a quick story with you. Yeah, there was a brother, and this shows the power of mannerisms and characteristics. In where the Olympics took place in Stratford in London, right? There used to be a table. The brothers used to run a table there, and there was one brother that joined the table, and his knowledge was very little. He didn't know much. He was a very sort of nice brother. He's always smiling. We'll stand at this table and smile. Now one day he was at the table. It's a true story. A woman came. And what she did was she looked at the material, she got really angry, she looked at him and she spat on his face. She literally spat on his face and the spit landed on his face. Right? And imagine, put yourself in that situation, what would you do? You'd be at least angry, you say something, yeah? Yeah, so, and she spat and he kept smiling. Now look at this brother's manners, yeah? And his akhlaq and his demeanor. He kept smiling at her. He went into his pocket, took out a tissue, cleaned his face, went in his pocket again, took out another tissue and he gave it to her because she had some spit on her face from spitting, right? And she just ran off. Now the same woman, a few weeks later, came back to the table, apologized, listened to what he had to say. She took Shahada and they got married. They literally got married. Yeah, yeah. But brothers, don't be too inspired. Yeah, that's not. I don't like telling this story too much because it motivates brothers in a totally different way. Yeah, but the point is, it's a true story. Wallah, it's a true story. But the point is, that just shows the power of mannerisms and characteristics. Yeah. Now you could just imagine the Prophet ﷺ's characteristics and his character and his manners with people. You know, how it would have been, subhanAllah. We don't experience people like that today. Even close, no one even close. But we should try to embody whatever we can of that with non-Muslims, inshallah. So anyway, getting back to the point, God's existence. How would you guys prove God's existence? John has sat down, he's agreed to talk about the foundations. First thing you want to do is you ask John the question. Say, John, do you believe in God? Ask the question. Because you don't know. If you don't know what he believes, it's pointless going into, God's existence. Because he may already believe in God. He may be a Christian who already believes in God. His concept of God may be messed up, but he believes in God, right? So how are you going to know this information? If you ask the right questions. So John, do you believe in God? Now, John will give you one of three answers. He will say, yes, I do, no, I don't, or I'm not sure. Okay? So if he says, yes, I do, then you don't have to do G. You go straight to O, oneness of GORAP. Okay? If he says, no, I don't, then you start with G. If he says, I don't know, you start with G. Okay? So when it comes to God's existence, has anyone got any arguments that they use to prove God's existence? Sorry? Try and prove otherwise. Give me some more details. What do you mean?
So if someone says to me, don't believe there's a God, I say, give me something to prove that there is no God. Look around you. Where did this come from?
Okay, good.
Say Big Bang.
Yeah.
Where did that come from?
Yeah.
It's been initiated somewhere. So then they're like, okay, yeah.
MashaAllah is good. So he's taking the Socratic method of asking questions basically, yeah? MashaAllah is very good. So you can ask questions like that, right? What else? What other positive argument can you give? Yes, brother.
The phone example.
The phone example. What is the phone example?
The materials and how.
Can we get a mic in the audience so we can get, inshallah?
Okay, so in regards to the phone example,
Yep.
you know, something which we carry around in our pockets. How did it come about, basically? Can it come from nothing?
Yep.
And then you talk about the materials itself. It needs a creator, it needs someone to put it together, basically. So the world and the universe is more complex than a mobile phone, and that everything's in working order. Can it come from nothing? So that's the example.
Okay, good. So let's work with that. That's exactly one of the arguments that we use. It's a very simple design argument, right? Now, you can use anything, okay? So you can, if you're speaking to someone and they have a pen in their pocket, or they're wearing glasses, or they have a bag, whatever they have, just use that as the example. Or if this is a phone, phones, normally everyone has phones, right? So you can use a phone. Now, all you're doing is you're asking them a simple question. Well, or you're suggesting something, and let's do this in this way. I'm gonna share a story with you, and I want you to sort of engage with me on this, yeah? Now, here's the story. Before you guys came in this morning, right? You know this phone that I've claimed now? What happened was I sat down, this phone wasn't here in the morning, right? But the windows were open. And 1 mile down the road, there's a plastic factory, right? And there's 2 miles down the road, there's a factory that makes chips out of silicon, etc. So what happened is the weather conditions were so perfect that pieces of plastic flew out of the plastic factory, flew across the streets, through the window, and they started spinning around in the air in this room here, right? And as this was happening, because the weather conditions and the gravitational sort of axes of the earth were so perfect, the silicon from the silicon factory, pieces of chips and different sort of electronics flew through the window, started again spinning around in the air, and they sort of molded themselves together, and then the plastic formed itself around the phone, and then the phone landed on the table. And then I took the phone. Who believes that story? Anyone? No one believes the story. Okay, let me ask you another question. Why don't you believe that story? Why is it impossible?
It's impossible because...
It's not good enough saying it's impossible. Why is it impossible?
It's clearly designed, so it's not reasonable.
Okay, so you're saying it's clearly designed. Okay, it's very interesting. What we do as humans, when we look at something, very quickly we process. So you were listening to my story, and you're looking at the phone, and the phone told you, I'm using very simple language enough, the phone told you that this guy is a liar. He's making it up. Yeah? What is it about the phone that tells you my story is false?
Is it that all the conditions have to be right for it to go into place? Then it's going to be very difficult for all those conditions to
It's a complicated
be aligned.
Yeah, it's complicated. Yeah, the conditions, I mean, that's like a 0.000000, God knows how many zeros % chance of what I said being true, right? But the atheists like to say, but there's a chance, yeah? And they'll go to that level. But the point is, it's complicated, as the brother said. It's complicated. What else?
Complexity is like far too advanced.
So what's advanced about it?
Because like the amount of different things that are like corresponding like to one another is just far too like complex.
So say that again.
I said, I'd argue that.
So what's complex about the phone?
I'd argue. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it should be working, inshallah. Yeah, it's working, it's working.
Yeah, like, you'd argue that it's far too complex because.
Keep hold of it for us.
Yeah, you'd argue that is like really complex because there's far too much different things that they're kind of corresponding and they're over each other. So, for example, the fact that that's super complex, one, from how the things come together. Number two, the phone has a GUI, so it has it has apps and stuff.
So it has a function.
Yeah, it has function. It has too much things and layers that could happen by chance. So, for example, just the fact that the factory, just the material is like 0.1. Then use 0.1 with the functionality and all the other purposes that I have is potentially impossible.
Okay, good. So what we're saying essentially, when you look at the phone, there's many things you pick up on, right? That it's complex. It has layers of complexity, functionality. It has a
direct purpose. For example, like with a phone, we know we use it to call.
Yep. So it's a direct purpose.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it has. Yeah. So
yep.
You'd argue all of them things put together, even like, for example, how
for example, the phone makes our life easier.
Yep. Yep.
So
good. So those are some brilliant points. You look at the phone and you pick up, okay, it has complexity, it has layers, it has a purpose, all of these things. It has a shape, it has a function, right? And that leads us to the conclusion of what? That there is a designer, there's a creator of the phone, right? There has to be. Yes, brother.
So if you use that argument, then because I have a conversation with some Harry, a similar argument. So having
hold on to it, like everyone's going to be
So having a conversation with somebody who used a similar argument, and they were saying that, but with a phone, we can actually see it being designed. Like someone could do a time lapse in a factory.
Yep.
Somebody working in a factory can actually see the phone being made.
Yep.
But in terms of the human beings or the beginning of the universe, nobody has seen that. Those
Yeah.
arguments they use. So
Yeah, but that's a misplaced argument, and I'll tell you why, right? Because what they're doing is they're saying they could, right? Have they seen this specific phone being made in the factory? No. Right? So they could. These are potentials, right? We're not talking about potentials. What we're saying is you're using your reason right here. You don't have to go out. You're using your mind, your reason, your rational faculties to come to the conclusion that the phone must have a designer or a creator. Based on looking at the phone itself, not based on your experience of the phone being designed in the factory, right? So it's a misplaced argument. They do that sometimes, right? The point is, you're looking at this phone, right? I'm giving you a story about this phone. You're saying no, it can't be true. Why are you saying no? You're saying no not because you saw the phone being made in the factory. You're saying no because you look at the phone and you see it has many layers, complexity, shape, form, purpose, and therefore it requires a designer or a creator, right? So they're trying to undermine your reason here, right? It's almost a red herring. Yeah, so the sisters are mentioning laws of cause and effect. There has to be an uncaused cause, an intelligent creator, absolutely. So that's what we're getting to. So the point here is that the phone requires a creator, right? Now you can take something simple, even more simple. Like I've done this with a piece of tissue with people, right? As simple as a piece of tissue is, when you look at the tissue, you can say it's designed because there's a certain shape, it's cut in a certain way, it has certain prints going down on certain sides. You know it's designed. Now, if simple things like this require a creator, then what about the universe? Very simple argument. The universe is far more complex. The universe is far more ordered than these things. If anything, you need the universe and the laws of the universe for us to be able to make things like this in the first place.
So with that argument, could you also say that with human beings, even though yes, we've been able to create other things, no one ever has and probably never will be able to create a human being as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does in terms of naturally being born, etc.
Yeah, you can, absolutely. You can follow up like that as well. As long as you get that core argument across to them, right, which makes sense to them, and then you can elaborate further as well on that point. But is that clear for everyone? It's a very simple argument, yes.
Have you had anyone counter that argument, and what have they said? And then what's...
That was one of the points. That's pretty much the only main point they sort of bring up, which is, oh, well, we can see it being made. We can.
If they're sort of, at that point, being just ignorant and not really wanting to listen or accept, for the sake of not accepting, then how would you then...
So here's what we do then. So say you make the argument, right? You make this argument. They have no comeback. Say they've run out of comebacks, right? Because to be honest, there is no comeback to this argument. It's so simple, right? Say they have no comebacks, but they still say, I don't believe you. I don't agree with you. Now, I said it's a very interesting situation. You have a person who is not willing to acknowledge what you're saying, but they have no reasons not to acknowledge what you're saying. Now, we should ask our questions, why are they doing this? What this does is a red flag. It shows something else is going on deep inside. It shows that their problem isn't a rational problem. It shows it's an underlying emotional issue. And I can tell you this from experience, at least 95%, I would say even more probably, percent of atheists or people that don't believe in God, they don't not believe in God because they're rationally convinced there is no God. They don't believe in God because they've had some bad experiences in their life that they've misunderstood, and then later on they've tried to cover that with all of this rational nonsense basically, right? So if something like that happens, it should be, okay, something else is going on. Let me inquire about that now. So you change strategy at that point. You say, okay, you know what, let's put this aside. Let me ask you a question. Was there a point where you stopped believing in God? That question is a powerful question because now that's going to take them to the point where they once did believe in God and find out why they stopped. If you can find that out, then you can address that, inshallah, right? So you have to, again, it's all trial and error. Everyone's different, inshallah. Yes, brother.
If you're going back to the cause, going back to the initial, all the way back, everything's everything's got a cause, and you go back and say, well, there must have been an initial creator.
You have to press it and hold it down, I think.
So you go back causation and say, okay, you trace things back, and there was something must have started the first item, first event here, and they will say, well, fine, there's a cause and effect to get to the first item, but then you're taking a big leap from that to how did God then create that first item, basically, that initial first event, which set off the set of events which created us today.
Yep.
How do you link what happened in that first, to get the first thing going?
I don't think I understand the question. Can you rephrase it again?
I'm saying, you talk about causation, you trace everything backwards.
Yeah, you go backwards, yes.
And there must be a starting event.
Yes, there has to be a first cause.
Yeah. All the previous events you can see through science, because we're here, they can go back.
Yes.
So how do you then link God to that first one?
Okay, so this is the thing. The problem is they want to understand everything through the lens of empiricism, science. They want to understand the how of it, right? Now, just because we can't explain the how of it, doesn't mean it didn't happen that way, right? So we say God created or started off creation. Exactly how he did it, we can give them the theological perspective, which is Allah says, be and it becomes. Now, how does that look? We don't know. Allah knows best, right? And they would never know because it's beyond our senses. It's beyond the universe, right? And this is why science, when it comes to things that are outside the universe, science doesn't have a foot in the door, right? When it comes to the question of God, science can never prove nor disprove God's existence definitively. Because science can only deal with things that we can see and observe and study. Allah is beyond his creation, so it's not a question of science. But what we can do is we can infer. So we can look at what science is telling us about the universe, and based on that we can infer that there is a creator. So when they explain the water cycle, or when they explain how stars form, or when they explain the solar system and how it functions, based on all of this stuff, we can infer that there is a creator behind this. But you can't do the opposite. You can't disprove God's existence. Right? So they will try to get into the nitty-gritty, but you just show them it's irrelevant to what we're talking about. Inshallah. Now someone may turn around. Yes, brother.
What about using the argument that's in the Quran?
Yep. You can use that as well, absolutely. Now that's the sort of second level argument that we use. it's a bit more technical, you need a bit more time with that. So depending on how much time you have, if you have a lot of time with someone, then I personally prefer to use the Quranic argument, or the argument that we derive from the Quran directly.
But
right?
translate that so the rest of us will understand really well.
Okay, so the Quran says were they created from nothing, or were they themselves the
Creators, yeah.
Or did they create the
heavens and the earth?
Sky? And from this, the Mufassirun and the experts in Aqidah, they drag 4 possible scenarios.
Yep.
Want to go into that? Or?
Yeah, Bismillah, say it, sure.
So the universe has a uncreated creator. We'll talk about this at the end. The next one is the universe has a creator that was created. So this is a cause that it's infinite regress. You carry on. Okay. The next one is it came out of nothing. That's impossible.
Yep.
And the last one is they made it themselves. So how can created beings make something that is created that makes no sense?
Yeah, so brilliant, mashallah. It's a simple argument, but it takes a bit of time. So, as the brother said, from the ayat, the scholars have said that these possibilities that Allah is mentioning can be applied to anything that begins to exist, right? So that means anything besides Allah, you can ask these questions about. So we can apply it to the universe. When we're talking about the universe, first thing Allah says, were they created from nothing, right? So what do we get from this? Can something come from nothing? What do you guys think the answer is? No, out of nothing, nothing comes, right? Nothing, you can't produce anything, yeah? So the universe can't come from nothing. You can cross that one out. The next thing Allah says, were they the creators of themselves? So one question you can take from this is, could the universe create itself? Could the universe create itself? Okay, you guys are nodding, but why not? Okay, good. So the problem here is when you say something creating itself, the issue, it's a paradox, right? Which means that for something to create itself, it has to exist and not exist at the same time, right? So for the universe to create itself, it has to already be there. Because if it's going to create itself, it has to exist to do the creation. But if it's already there, then how can it create itself? Because it's already there. Do you see the problem there? So something cannot create itself.
The example they give, a mother giving birth.
Yeah, like a mother giving birth to herself. It's impossible. Or you creating your own self. It's impossible. Right? So you can cross that option out as well. The next thing Allah says, yes brother.
That's okay.
So the next thing Allah says is, were they the creators of the heavens and the earth? Now one of the questions, there's 2 questions you could take from this, but one of the things you can ask is, can something create something that existed before it? So Allah is asking us, did we create the heavens and the earth? What came first? The heavens and the earth or us in the planet? The heavens and the earth came. So how could we create the heavens and the earth? Even if we came before it, we won't have the power to do such a thing. Right? Look how expansive the heavens and the earth are. We don't have this ability. Right? So that you can cross off. And the other thing is, you can ask is, can something created create something else? Right? Because Allah is saying, did you create the heavens and the earth? We're created, the universe is created. So can something created create the universe? Right? So they have this multiverse idea, yeah? That so some of them will say that our universe A, was created by universe B. And universe B was created by universe C. And universe C was created by universe D. Now what's the problem here? It's a bit of a technical point. We may not need to ever use it in the dawah, but now that we're discussing it, it's good to sort of understand this.
There's no first point. Everyone's creating.
Yeah, there's no first point. It goes on forever, and you can't traverse the infinite, right? Now let me explain that point in a very simple way. We're in Birmingham right now. Imagine at the end of the course, I want to go back to London. Now for me to go back to London, I have to get on the bus, right? Imagine there's a bus that goes straight to London. Now for me to get on the bus, I need to have a pound coin. Okay, now imagine I get to the bus stop and I don't have a pound coin. So I asked, there's a brother next to me, I asked the brother, I said, brother, can you give me a pound coin so I could go on the bus? The brother says, I'd love to give you a pound coin, but I don't have one. So let me ask the person behind me. He asked the person behind him and he says, brother, I'll give you the pound coin so you can give Imran the pound coin, but I don't have a pound coin. So let me ask the person behind me. Now imagine if this asking for a pound coin went on forever, would the event of me getting on the bus and going home ever take place? Never. Right? So there has to be a first cause. There has to be the first person that gives the pound coin. Right? That's the point here. If there was universe creating universe creating universe creating universe forever, we would never be here. Right? There has to be a first point. Even if the multiverse was true, there still has to be a first cause. Right? There still has to be a first cause. Yes, brother.
You know, in terms of when I've done the training before, so when I've previously done the training, we were sort of encouraged not to use Allah, the word Allah, or the Quran says, because obviously they don't believe in it. You know, we're sort of already putting that into their heads, but getting them to rationally think about it until revelation comes. So we can use the arguments, but if you say the Quran says, psychologically they'll probably think that I don't believe in the Quran, so whatever you say in the Quran, it's not going to make sense in the word. I don't take it as
Yeah, I don't think that happens. What I've noticed is when you start to show them the powerful arguments that exist in the Quran, right? Because this argument's a very powerful argument, right? There's literally no response to this, because it's a process of elimination until you get to the only conclusion, which is that the universe and everything that exists was created by an uncreated creator. That's the only logical, rational conclusion. Now, if you're showing them that this type of understanding and logic is found in the Quran itself, that's going to actually attract them to the Quran even more. Then when you get to revelation, it's going to give them more reasons to accept it. Right? Because most of them aren't even aware that the Quran contains arguments like this, that Allah engages people like this. You know, because their notion of God and religion is of Christianity, which was averse to reason and science and all of these things, right? That's their notion of religion. But when they see, look, there's a religion here which actually encourages the human being to think and to reflect and to believe with reason, that attracts them as well. But it'll depend on the person again. You'll have to really assess the person. But most people have noticed it works well. It shows them the power of the Quran, inshallah. Right? Because they're not being able to respond to the Quran. They're being challenged and they have no answers. You know, and that shows the strength of what we have, inshallah, to them as well. Psychologically, it sets them up to accept, eventually, inshallah. Any other questions on this before we move on? The point, yes, brother.
So if you have somebody who's a polytheist, who believes in multiple gods, so how would you first then establish an argument for them to believe in one God?
We're going to get to that in oneness now, okay? Inshallah. So we'll try to tackle polytheism, Trinity and stuff like this now in the oneness. But with God's existence, is everyone okay? Just establishing that there is a creator. You know, the oneness we're going to get to now. But remember, use the simple argument always. You don't like, you can use the Quranic argument, but anything more than this is no point. With 99% of people, it won't be useful, right? Unless you're talking to like a professor, a philosophy professor or something, which most people are now. Then most philosophy professors are cracked anyway. Yeah, so you won't need to use these arguments with them. But just stick to the basic ones, inshallah. That mic's giving everyone issues, isn't it?
It's a fun mic.
Mashallah.
So I just want to ask on this point, if you can't get agreement on this very first point, is there any point moving on? And the other part of that is, if this part takes a very long time, so you might spend like half an hour discussing this in great animated detail, do you not move on from this point until you have that next stage, or or is it okay to spend all your time here and not try and jump onto the rest of the method?
Yeah, so okay, let me sort of transport what we're covering theoretically into a practical, pragmatic way when you're actually out there. And I'll give you from personal experience, right? I teach the GORAP, but I can tell you from experience, most of the times I don't cover the whole GORAP, right? You don't need to. Because people out there, you'll be surprised, they're quite well versed with many things, right? I've spoken to people that already know that the Quran must be from God. But strangely, they have a problem believing in God, right? And then you just show them, if you believe in the Quran says God is one, then you should believe that too. And then you're done pretty much. Then you just explain a few things and inshallah, you take them to the next step. You'll have to wait. Sometimes I start with P, prophethood, because it's very powerful in itself. Now, if you prove prophethood, you're essentially proving all the other points. Because if the Prophet ﷺ was proven to be true, and they acknowledge that, then the Quran is from God, and God exists, and He's one. So it covers all bases, right? So but when you start to do this practically, initially your first few times you may find it beneficial going through the whole GORAP slowly. And if that means that you spend half an hour and the person's in a rush, take their details and carry on the conversation later on, right? There's no rush. It's a development process basically that you're going through. But over time you'll realize that, I don't need to use the whole GORAP. Many times you speak to people, most of the people, they already believe in some sort of God, right? Okay, let's go straight to oneness. Right? And then maybe touch upon prophethood, and that'll cover all the bases. So you'll weigh it out, but it's good to learn all of the points so you can go into your toolbox and take whatever you need and use it, inshallah. Right? But initially, the first few times, definitely try to go through the whole thing, inshallah, if you can. Yeah, because it'll be very effective with internalizing these concepts for yourselves. Hopefully that addresses it right, inshallah. Okay, so let's move on. Again, agreement is key. When you move on, ask them, do you agree? If they say yes, then move on to the next point. If they say no, clarify for them again. But if they still say no, and they have no good reasons to say no, then change strategy. Ask them, is there something else that took you away from God? Did you ever have a bad experience that took you away from God, etc.? That's how you want to change the conversation then, inshallah. So, oneness of the Creator. Yeah, agreement. Okay, God's oneness. So how would you prove God's oneness? Yes, brother. Okay, yeah.
So let's say you've done the God existence and you've got no reason to deny, and then deny. How do you approach that then?
So exactly what I said to the brother, if they have no reason to deny, but they still deny, then that's a telltale sign that it's not a rational problem. Then start to ask them other questions. Say, look, let's put this aside. Was there a time you believed in God? Was there a time you stopped believing in God? What happened? Get to the bottom of it and then address that, inshallah. Yeah? Yes, brother.
So as part of that, the basic God belief in it, they'll bring up evilness. So if there was a God, why is there millions of people dying? So that the issue of evilness.
Problem of evil, yes. Yeah, we cover that. Would you like me to cover it now? Should we wait till the? Yeah. Okay. Let's just address the problem of evil quickly. Yeah. So the problem of evil, I'll give you the simple form of it. They say, if there is a God, why is there evil and suffering in the world? Right. This has been formulated in many ways. Right. Now, from an Islamic perspective, it's not a problem for many reasons. Okay. Firstly, the most easiest way you can address this is by highlighting to them they refer to it as cosmology, right? Your worldview, your perspective of looking at reality. Our cosmology is that life is a test. We're here to be tested, and then we go on to paradise or hellfire, right? The eternal life is to come in the next world. From just based on that point alone, if life is a test, what does that mean? We will be tested. We're going to go through hardships, trials. Tests are never easy, right? They're difficult, but they always result in something good, right? So life is a test. Their cosmology or way of looking at life is, you only live once. It's about progress, material progress in this life. Now, when you have that type of vision, then any obstacle or trial or tribulation is something that's really bad, right? So it's really a problem for them, not for us, right? Yes, brother.
So just based off that argument, if you do say that you're going to be tested and stuff, the most common response that I'm assuming as well anyway, is the fact that if it's a test and everything, then why is God testing us? Why is there? Why is
yeah, so the why question, they'll keep going to the why. But there's a point where we have to say, look, there are some things God knows and some things we don't know, right? There's many things like this, bro. I'll give you an example. The issue of qadr. Don't even call it an issue. The question of qadr and free will and predestination. And I don't know why we try to articulate these things to them. Yeah, because what the assumption behind the question is that I have the ability to understand everything like God. Yeah, we're not God, we're humans. There's some things we'll never understand. Our cognitive faculties have limitations, right? There are some things that are completely beyond us. So why even try, to get into that? It's this again, conditioning, this whole Western philosophical tradition which is based on the human intellect can achieve all truth. No, it can't. We can get to some points. Allah's given us the ability, but there's a cutoff, and that's why as Muslims, once we get to who Allah is and we understand who Allah is, then logically it makes sense. We submit to Him and we obey. There will be many things that Allah has told us to do that rationally we may not be able to make sense of, that we may not be able to conceptualize, but it doesn't matter because we know it's coming from the All-Knowing. I'm not all-knowing, Allah is all-knowing. I'm submitting to Him. Even if I don't understand the logic behind this, no problem. You know, there's many things I don't understand. There's many things I think I understand and then I change my opinion. Right? It's arrogance basically. It's human arrogance. Was there another question? No? Okay, cool. Let's move on, inshallah. So when it comes to oneness, yes, brother.
What about using, saying, why restricting God to just being evil or not evil, using the other names of Allah as Allah's all wise, He knows what's best for us, and other names of Allah.
Yeah, good. So that's another way you can do it as well, right? So again, they have a Christian conception of God, which is God is love, God is mercy, and that's pretty much where they stop. But we know as Muslims, Allah has many names and attributes, right? Allah is Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, Al-Wadud, but He's also Al-Hakim. Now what does that mean? He's all wise. So therefore, whatever happens in this existence, there's wisdom behind it. Now just because, again, arrogance, just because we can't see the wisdom, does that now mean there is no wisdom? No. It's just we can't see it. You know, one of the most beautiful stories which completely destroys the problem of evil is found in the Quran, the story of Musa and Khidr. It's so powerful. Just think about it. This is a prophet. Allah had given Musa alayhi salam a certain type of knowledge. Allah had given Khidr a different type of knowledge. Right? And their meeting is so profound. It demolishes this problem of evil. Musa alayhi salam accompanies him, and Khidr does certain things which according to Musa's Sharia just don't add up. They don't make sense. Right? So what does he do naturally? He calls him out. Why did you do this? You know, what's going on? You know, he puts the poor fishermen, they take them across the river. Khidr, before he leaves, smashes a hole into the boat. Why would you do that? They helped you out, and you just damaged their property. Right? From Musa alayhi salam's perspective, he had a certain limit, because his knowledge was given by Allah, but it was limited in a certain way. Khidr was given certain information from Allah, which was about the future. Right? So from Musa alayhi salam's perspective, as humans we jump. And we're human. These were prophets. And we've been given examples of prophets so that we realize we're nothing compared to them. And therefore, we're nowhere in this standing, right? We're going to jump at these things. Things will happen in our life. We don't understand them. Why did you do this? Why did this happen? Right? The ego gets inflamed suddenly. Like, why me? Why is it happening to me? Right? But then at the end, when Khidr tells him all of the information, he says, I put a hole because, you know, there was a king that was seizing the boats. And if this boat wasn't damaged, he would have taken the boat and the poor fisherman would have died out of starvation. But the fact that the boat was damaged now, which could be patched up eventually, the king would leave the boat, and who's going to be making a lot of money when their boat's the only boat in business? So there's wisdom of the future. We are limited as human beings too. We don't have access to the knowledge of the future. Allah does. Right? Therefore, things will happen that in that moment we won't be able to make sense of it. How many times has it happened in our own life where something has happened, we couldn't make sense of it, we started pulling our hair out, right? And then 6 months, a year later, we looked back and we're like, subhanAllah, if that didn't happen, I wouldn't be where I am today. Why do we have a different perspective a year later? It's because now we have new knowledge, we've gone through that time. Now we can connect the dots properly, which we couldn't in the time. So what is a Muslim to do when he doesn't understand things? He can't make sense of it. Yeah, that's it. Put your trust in Allah. He knows best. He wants best for you. Right? And it humbles you, and it's worship. You're submitting to Allah. You're submitting yourself, recognizing Allah knows best. You put your trust in Allah. Right? And now think of it this from the perspective of the atheist. You know, it's all about arrogance. It's all about them wanting to know everything, understand everything, etc. Right? So we can explain it like that as well. We can talk about the wisdom of Allah and bring that in. And there's many other things. You know, it's an expiation of sins. Trials and tribulations expiate sins. Trials and tribulations allow us to come closer to Allah. They act as a window of opportunity for us to turn back to Allah. Because sometimes we become heedless because of the dunya. And sometimes it takes a trial or tribulation for us to turn back. You know, so there's so many wisdoms behind trials and tribulations in this life. You know, so it's not a problem. It never was historically. The problem of evil, it was never seen as a problem. It was a predicament, something difficult. But the religious people, even non-Muslim Christians, they understood, okay, this is a part of the bigger picture. But from an atheist perspective, you have to empathize with them. From their perspective, they can't make sense of this. They go crazy. You know, so it's a problem for them. It's not a problem for us. Yes, brother.
I think Ustad Hamza, he said that we have a pixel, and Allah has the pixel.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a beautiful way of putting it. We have a pixel. We only have a small, limited understanding. Allah has the picture. Inshallah. So any other questions before we move on to oneness? Okay, we'll do a quick Q&A at the end as well, inshallah. Okay, so oneness, one thing you'll find really surprising is that many people out there, if they acknowledge God exists, many times they won't really have a problem with believing He's one. It's very natural. If there is an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-able creator, then there's no need for a second or a third. What's the second or third going to do? Right? It's a natural thing. It's a principle where they say don't multiply entities beyond necessity. They apply it in science as well. Yeah, so don't multiply causes if there's no need for causes. So if there's an all-powerful creator, is there need for a second creator or a third creator? No. It's built into us, this concept. So for example, if we're sitting here, imagine there's no windows on that door and it's blacked out, and you hear a knock. So you hear this. What do you think? Someone is at the door. You don't say a football team is at the door, right? Why? Because you know, and you don't say no one is there. We say someone is there. Because you know a minimum of one is required for the door to knock, right? So it's a part of our psyche. If one is sufficient, there's no need to multiply beyond that, right? Yes, brother.
Is the oneness of God,
is the oneness of God like a usual problem with like non-Muslims?
Not necessarily, but it can be. You'll get some people that will, so for example, you're speaking to a Christian, right? They'll bring in the concept of the Trinity. That there's three, but it's one, but it's three, but they're one in some way, yeah? Now, the biggest issue with this concept of the Trinity is that if you go to the scholars of Christianity, they will tell you the Trinity is a mystery. We can't understand it. So those that try to explain it, they just, they're not going to get anywhere, right? And here's the issue. If the most important thing for human salvation is understanding their Creator, then why would God make His knowledge so difficult for us to understand? That's for Western people that have trouble with it, academics. Imagine people in Africa or in Asia try to explain the Trinity to them, right? But when it comes to Tawheed, oneness of Allah is very easy. Like there's mashallah, there's teams in Africa that we work with as iERA, we have teams on the ground. We don't speak the same language, but to communicate the oneness of Allah is very simple. One God, they understand. So it's very natural to the human being, Tawheed. Now say if someone comes around and says, well, why not 3, 4 or 5 gods? Why one God? What would you say? Yes?
Saying that if there are multiple gods, for example, and they wanted to impose their will, for example, if there was, let's say, multiple, 3, 4, 5, if a certain amount wanted to do one thing and a certain amount wanted to do another, then whose will would be imposed onto the action. If there's, let's say, an odd number, 3 or 4, 3 or 5, the ones that obviously have the more of them would have the power to do the thingy, the action. But if that was true, then there'd only be need for one. And if it's even, then there would be no action, nothing would happen. If both sides wanted something to happen, nothing would happen because of the difference between them. So therefore it only says that God has to be one, because if there are multiple odd numbers, then it would just lead to the same outcome, if something happens. But if there were even amount of God, which are multiple again, then nothing would happen because there would be no will imposed because of the
Okay, who understood that? I'm very confused. No, but I know what you're saying, it's a very good argument. I think Imam al-Ghazali made a very similar argument with the rock and the wheels acting upon the rock. But remember, let's think, people out there today who have no clue about these things, yeah? Yes, beautiful, Jazakallah khair. So they can't be all powerful. One will always impose. And if they cancel each other out, well, then there is no will, right? Or if they agree with each other, well, then there's no powerful will. They're dependent upon each other. We don't believe in a dependent God, right? So you can summarize in a very easy way, right? There's an ayah in the Quran which Allah, I think, repeats twice or 3 times. Where Allah says, had there been other gods besides Allah within the heavens and the earth, both the heavens and the earth would have been completely destroyed and ruined, right? This is very powerful. Right? Now think about this. Allah is saying, had there been other deities besides Allah within the heavens and the earth, both the heavens and the earth would have been completely destroyed. Now based on what the brother said as well, why is this the case? Why would everything be ruined if there was more than one God? Chaos. Why would there be chaos? Yeah, they won't always agree. Why won't they always agree? Yeah, based on what we know about Allah. Based on what we know about Allah, why wouldn't they agree? Yes.
Say one wants it to rain in Birmingham and the other one just wants it to be sunny. Then no one's will's going to be imposed if there's two of them, and if there's three, then what?
If one's will is opposed, then that is the all-powerful will, not the other one, right? So the point is, we know who Allah is by His names and attributes. So Allah is the all-powerful. He's Al-Qahhar. He's the one that overpowers, subdues. He's not dependent on anything or anyone. He's not answerable to anyone or anything, right? Sometimes they bring the question. They say, "Oh, why can't it happen?" You know, we see cars driving down the road, and we know that behind a car there's many designers, and they all get together. They work on different parts, and they agree with each other, and they produce a nice car, right? That works. What's the problem with this? What's the issue with this analogy? Yes, brother.
Because we're not the same as God. We need to depend on each other to create something.
Unlike a God, we need to depend on each other to create something, and it's not the same as a God. He doesn't depend on anyone else to create something.
Absolutely, that's the fundamental answer. That the analogy is flawed. You're making an analogy to a creator being that's nothing like you. Yeah, we're limited. We need to depend on each other. Allah is not limited in any way. Yes.
That's what it's like. One designer, someone has to make the decision on how they want the car to look, and so on.
Yeah, ultimately there's one chief designer anyway, right? But even if you look at it, say there's no chief designer, it's still problematic because you're talking about limited human beings that need to depend upon each other to make things. Allah is not dependent, He's independent. And therefore, knowing what we know about Allah, if there was other beings, there won't be agreement. It'll be corruption. Everything will be destroyed, right, within the heavens and the earth. So the fact that everything is in order and everything's functioning and humans keep living and the sun keeps rising and setting and there's order within our solar system, within our earth, within our lives, what does this show? That there's only one creator, right? So you can check it the other way as well with them, right? So this is a very powerful argument and it's enough for most people. You can even take it very basic and say, look, there's no comparison, but by greater reason, how many head teachers of a school? One. How many, captains of a ship? One. Even as limited humans, we understand the need for authority and how it functions, Then why would there be more than one when it comes to the entire universe and its creator? Right? So these are a few ways you guys can address this, inshallah. And again, get an agreement from them and then move on, inshallah, to the next point. So the next thing we want to move to, so the link between the Go and the Rap. So that we've done Geo, which is God's existence and oneness. Now we want to take them to Revelation. Now from experience, I could tell you this is the point you're going to have the most problem with. Yes, brother, you got a question?
Sorry, slightly off topic, but why in the Quran is Allah referred to as He and not she?
Ask that in the Q&A, bro. We'll get to that because it's going to lose my trail of thought with this then, inshallah. So we make a link between Go and Rap now, right? So the Geo is done, God's existence is done, you get an agreement. Oneness is done, you get an agreement. The problem you're going to face, I think, especially these days, is with Revelation. People don't want to submit to Revelation. They don't want to submit to a higher authority. They want to do whatever they want to do, right? So you have to show them the need for revelation here. What is the need for revelation? So when it comes to revelation, there's two parts. First is the need for revelation. The second is the proofs of revelation, okay? So what can you guys suggest as far as need for revelation? Why do human beings need revelation?
For guidance.
Guidance, good. That's a good starting point. Yes, brother.
I believe, for example, now that from our concept to go, you've established the existence of God and there's a oneness of God. Now you need to be able to connect with the God, right?
So we highlighted already, we've already established that there's the existence of God and there's the oneness of God, right? I'd argue, in my opinion, for example, we need a way to, actually communicate or kind of link with that God now, for example.
Yep.
And how do we connect with Him? And I believe, for example, now, the example that people say is, for example, when you're buying a gift, right? People say, okay, why don't I worship God by just, doing, yoga or something? Or why do we pray a certain way? And then, for example, it's the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to pray to Him. Hence the reason why He's given us the guidance of the revelation, for example, the Quran and etc.
Argue that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, guidance is a big thing, right? They will say, I'll just worship God as I want to worship God.
Yeah, and then, for example, the example that they give is like with a present, right? When you buy a present for somebody, you don't buy a present that you want. You buy a present that the person wants, right?
Yep.
For example, if somebody likes yellow, I won't buy him something blue, right?
Yeah.
Now, for example, in the same way, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's told us the way He wants to be worshipped. Why? Because that's the way He's told us. That's the way He prefers. And I guess simply that's the,
Yeah, that's a brilliant point. Absolutely. Look, guidance is the key thing. The problem is most people they become gods themselves these days, yeah? I create my reality, I know what's right, I know what's wrong. If I'm going to worship God, I'm going to do it in my own way. And you have these new age spiritual movements that are coming up, yeah? So with these people, you have to show them that, look, if you take that approach, everyone's going to take that approach and everyone's going to be doing their own thing. Where are you getting this from, other than your own desires and your own, ideas? It's not true, it's just you made it up. So if it's made up and there's no truth to it, then you're wasting your time essentially. Yeah? And if God has told us, the way to do it, then why wouldn't you do it that way? It just makes sense, right? And you can also mention that, look, if God, this creator, as we've agreed, He's all powerful, and He's one, and He created us, and He takes care of us, our most basic needs, right? He provides us with everything, then wouldn't He provide us with guidance as well when we need guidance? Absolutely. You can also use the example of, manuals, right? When you buy something, a product, it always comes with a manual. Why do humans write manuals?
The best way to, because there's one way, for example, when someone creates something, they know the best way to use it, for example, right?
Yep.
Like if you have a phone, you put it next to your ear, you would put it next to your legs. It is there. You get it?
Absolutely, yeah.
Same way. So
Yeah.
if you want the easiest way to go about something, the person who created it is the only person essentially that can give you.
Good. So one thing you can establish is that the person that creates a thing knows the most about that thing, right? And he can best advise in regards to that thing. But why as humans, psychologically, emotionally, why as humans do we find the need to write a manual? We know the benefits of it. We can teach so people know how to use it, so they can take care of it, so they can dispose it later on. All of these things. But why? Why are we concerned about this? Yes, brother.
It gives you a better understanding about the product.
Of course it does. But why are we concerned about giving other people better understanding of our product? Yes, brother.
So recently, they may accept 1 and 2, but the arguments I often see as well is like the universe is so vast, especially with the NASA images that came out, that it's so big. What does God care if I'm homosexual? So how would you then?
Yeah, we'll address that. But let's just finish this point, inshallah, first. Let's come to this brother first.
With the manual,
Yeah, I'll repeat what you're saying, inshallah.
so with the manual, the person doesn't automatically have the knowledge already. So somebody needs to give that knowledge to them. They don't really have themselves.
Yeah, no, I agree. So we know that the knowledge has to be transferred, information has to be given. But what I'm getting at is why as human beings, in the first place, do we find the need to write a manual, to give all this information? Yes, but
I'd argue that, for example, you need that set manual to kind of go back to, because imagine, for example, something has its purpose initially, and then someone says that's not the reason for it. There's going to be that sense of conflict, isn't it? So you can always go back and refer and look back at the manual and say, yo, this was actually the reason why. So if somebody in some way deviate, we can always go back.
So it's to redirect you as well. But what is the fundamental reason humans produce manuals? Yes, bro.
Is it because it's the easiest way to convey information?
Why do we want to convey information?
Because it's in our nature to be forgetful.
Good. Yeah, we forget. Yeah, but why are we concerned about so that people don't forget these things and they're reminded? What is the fundamental driving force behind writing manuals? Yes.
Give the thing its due rights.
Sure, but why are you concerned about that? Yes, brother. Why do you? Okay, so why do you want best for that person? We're getting there now. Yes. They can, yeah. But what is it that drives that? Where is it coming from? Yes, but why are we concerned about that? What is it about our nature that we?
We don't want them to ruin our product.
Yeah, but we wouldn't really care about one product that's out there. As humans, you just be like, yes, as long as they buy it, it's fine. Why are we concerned that there's no chaos? I'm trying to get at something. There's something about the human being which leads them. Concern. It's concern. It's compassion. It's human concern and compassion at the end of the day. That results in all of this, Now think about this, if limited human beings have this concern and compassion towards others, what about the creator of those human beings? He's not going to have the compassion to give them a revelation, guidance? Of course he is. Of course he is. SubhanAllah. So this is one way, another way you can establish the need for revelation. You can also highlight to them that, look, there are many, one thing that's for sure, even in the 21st century, every country, every state within a country has its own rules and regulations. No two states agree on everything, right? Every community, even if you go to the Amazonian rainforest, you'll find tribes that don't have a spoken language, but they still have laws in place. Because you need laws, you need guidance to live your lives. So we haven't figured it out. So therefore the Creator, if there's a need for it, the Creator must surely provide for that need and cover and cater for that need, inshallah. Right? So you can establish the need for revelation like this to them, or try to, inshallah. Then you can move on to proofs of revelation. We're not going to cover that in any detail here. There's a lot of information out there. What could you use as proof for the Quran being revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? We don't. Yeah, I'm not following these slides properly today, subhanAllah, but it's fine, inshallah. As long as you guys are getting the points, that's the key thing. This is a really good book, by the way, for if you're interested in proofs of revelation. So how to prove the Quran is from Allah to non-Muslims. It's called The Eternal Challenge. I think we've sent some boxes, we'll send some boxes over soon, inshallah, so you guys can read it, but you'll have to give it to a non-Muslim once you've read it, inshallah, because they're printed specifically for non-Muslims, inshallah. So, proofs for revelation, yes?
Can we mention the thing like the scientific facts mentioned in the Quran to use all of these facts to prove that it's from God?
Yeah, Sheikh, you're opening a hot topic, mashallah. So look, scientific miracles, yeah, we don't want to use it as scientific miracles, okay? Because there's a problem when you say that, okay? Now I'm going to try to summarize it in a very simple way so we can understand it. This whole scientific miracles narrative started about 20 years ago or so, a couple of decades ago with Maurice Bucaille and some of the other individuals who started to write about correlations with science in the Quran, right? Now, are there correlations? Definitely, right? With modern science and correlations with the Quran. But to put it as and say that it's a scientific miracle is problematic because two things need to happen to call it a miracle. Number one, the scientific fact, say X, whatever it is, has to be definitive, that this is it. Number two, when it comes to the ayah of the Quran that you're linking the scientific fact to, we have to say that the meaning of this ayah is only this. It's only one meaning, but we can't say that because based on the principles of exegesis, we know that many ayat of the Quran have multiple meanings, right? So you can't say that this is the correct meaning and the other ones are wrong, right? It's possible this is one of the meanings, but the other meanings could be true too, right? And most of the time when we're linking, or the ayat of the Quran that are linked to certain scientific phenomenon are those ayat that have a scope of different interpretations and meanings, right? So it's possible that that's the meaning, but it doesn't have to, it's not definitively that is the meaning. Now you got two uncertainties here. One, science can't give you absolute truth anyway. It doesn't deal with absolutes. So whatever they're proposing, say the Big Bang. Say the scientists tomorrow conclude that the Big Bang, this particular model of the Big Bang, is the way it happened. Although they will never say that because there's many models of Big Bang, right? There are many different models. Now we're taking one model and we're saying that's the right one, and we're taking one ayah of the Quran, we're saying that this one ayah has this particular interpretation which shows that there's a correlation, there's a miracle here. Right? But both sides we can't do that. We can't say that the scientific fact is absolute, and we can't say that the ayah in the Quran that we're linking it to, its interpretation, it has only one interpretation, which is the interpretation that links to the science. Does that?
So what about the, is it related to what you just said?
Yes.
So in Quran, Allah SWT says that the universe is expanding.
Yes.
Prophet Muhammad sallallahu peace be upon him mentioned this more than
Yes, sir.
100 years ago.
Yes.
When there is no development of science or whatever. Only in 1937 discovered heart of telescope.
Yes.
Through it, they saw and found it is really expanding.
Yes.
We specifically mentioned in the Quran. What I'm trying to say is that
Yeah.
if I mention this to non-Muslims and non-believers to prove the Prophet Muhammad, whatever he's mentioned about this particular ayah, about the universe expanding, it's not his word, it came from Allah.
Yes.
You Archangel Gabriel put it into Ma, he just uttered it.
Yep.
I'm trying to prove that these.
So the way we can say it is that there is a very interesting correlation here, right? This is how I would say it. So I would use it sometimes, but I'll say it like this, that there's a very interesting correlation here. Over 1400 years ago, the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, or the Quran says, that the universe is expanding. Now, that's one interpretation of that particular ayah that we're talking about. There are other interpretations of the ayah. But what we could say is that according to one of the interpretations of this particular verse, is that the universe is expanding. It was one part, and then it's split apart by God, and it's expanding. Now, it's very interesting that now modern science, one of the models of modern science, when it comes to the universe and the origins, is also suggesting that the universe is expanding. Right? And this is amazing that a book mentions this 1400 years ago. But see, Shaykh, I didn't use the miracle, it's a scientific miracle, because that's a definitive claim. And for us to make that claim, we have to say that that ayah has only that interpretation, and we have to say that this, with the science of the universe, origins of the universe, this particular model is the only correct model. But scientists won't say that. There's many scientists that believe in the Big Bang, that the universe, there are other scientists that believe in the oscillating model. So for the scientists that believe in the oscillating model, this doesn't work then. Do you see? So there's these small issues where we have to be careful with the way we phrase it now. So we can mention it still, talk about the correlation and the similarities and how amazing it is, but just refrain from using the word scientific miracle, because that's where it becomes problematic. And I've seen that when you do it like that, it still is very impactful. It still has a very powerful impact on people.
Saying miracles, if someone mentions facts.
You can't say fact in science. Even philosophers of science, they will never use the word fact. There is no absolute fact in science. It's based on induction. The theories of science are not facts. The scientists will say fact, but with a small f. They're not facts as in actual facts. Because there's many models. What are they doing? They're correlating data. So they have data points, and then scientists come and connect the dots, and they say, this maybe happened. Another scientist will come and say, no, it's slightly different, it's like this. Third one will say, no, it's this model. That's why they have like 5 different main models of the Big Bang, right? All different, and all are recognized scientifically. The one that's become popular in mainstream academia or amongst the populace is the Big Bang model itself, which is one closed and then it was split and then it started expanding. But then there's a few other models which are also respected as well. So we can link it now to that particular model, but another scientist has to come and say, well, no, I acknowledge the other model. Then we have that issue. But if we say correlation, similarity, without using words like fact or miracle, then we're fine, inshallah, not an issue. Yes, brother.
I think what you're trying to say is that because science always changes, there's no point in saying it's a miracle because the science changes, and you're suggesting that the Quran is wrong. No, wrong.
And that's what atheists have done. If you like, there's a paper Hamza published on this as well. The atheists actually went and did this exact thing. They made the correlation with the embryo and the stages of the embryo, and we published a booklet in iERA. And then what the atheists did, because new science was showing, or some new science was suggesting that one of the phases came before the other one. I think it was the bones or the clothing which took place first. Now some scientists were suggesting no, it's the other way around. So the atheists said, look, the Quran is wrong now. And now they're able to say that because we've created that precedence, right? Whereas the reality is the Quran, Allah gave us that to lead us to His worship. So when Allah talks about natural phenomena in the Quran, it's not from the perspective of a scientific textbook, it's from the perspective of look at the creation of Allah, it'll create awe within you and it will lead you to the worship of Allah, right? So that's the epistemic reason for why these verses are there in the first place, which is take the person from the existence of God to His worship. Right? And therefore, when Allah mentions certain things, sometimes it could be mentioned from perspective, about the sun setting in Mercury. It doesn't have to be, it's not a scientific explanation, it's a vantage point explanation. What do people see? What were people at the time in 6th century Arabia seeing? The sun seemed like it was setting behind, the earth or the sea, whatever it was. It's about perspective, it's not a scientific textbook, the Quran. Although it mentions natural phenomena. Inshallah, that clarifies that point. Yes, brother.
Especially as lay people, there's certain interpretations of ayat we shouldn't go into because last thing we want to do for ourselves is speak of the Quran without.
Yeah, absolutely. Like if you study exegesis, and not that I have to any extent, but I've looked at this specific aspect of it, there are ayat in the Quran which have a number of different interpretations, right? All credible. Now we can't go and say that out of the 5, this one is right, the other 4 are wrong. What we can say is, this one's very interesting, it links to what modern science is showing, but maybe the other 4 are correct too, right? Or maybe one of the other 4 are correct. But I seem to gravitate more towards this one. But you can't say definitively the other ones are wrong, right? So, and for you to make the miracle claim, you have to do that. You have to specify which interpretation is correct and reject all the other ones, and then you can make the claim. But even if you do that, then you have the problem on the science side, which is science doesn't deal with facts anyway. So it's problems both ends. That's why the whole narrative doesn't work. That being said, like I said, you can always re-articulate in a different way and still present it, because it is very interesting. Very interesting, subhanAllah, the correlations between what Allah has told us and what modern science is showing us today. Okay, let's move on before we run out of time, inshallah. So proofs of revelation, scientific miracles modified in a way where you're not saying miracles, but you're showing correlations between science and what modern science is showing and what the Quran says, what Islam says. Historical miracles of the Quran, right? The linguistic miracle of the Quran is a very powerful one. Then you have some of the basic, simple ones. We may not appreciate them as Muslims, but they're very powerful. The fact that the Quran is easy to memorize, right? Muslims memorize the Quran, it's nothing special for us. But from a non-Muslim perspective, when do you find books being memorized cover to cover by 8, 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds, people in the 80s and 90s? SubhanAllah, and Allah says this in the Quran, that He's revealed it, and He's made it easy for us to learn. So you can mention these things as well. You can also mention the coherence of the Quran. The fact that it was revealed over 23 years and there are no contradictions in the Quran. There were no printing presses, there were no computers at the time, there were no editing software where you can sit down, and start to correlate different things and say, okay, make sure I mention this way so it lines up with what was mentioned earlier. None of this. It was revealed orally and it was memorized orally by the companions, and then they wrote them down on different parchment and bits at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So that itself is a very powerful miracle. And there's many others, but again, you guys can, if you read this book, it'll be very powerful, inshallah. Again, get an agreement and then you can move on to the last section, inshallah, which is prophethood. Now for me, this is my favorite section of the whole GORAP. I tend to lean towards this a lot, most of the time. And like I said, if you can do this, if you can establish that the Prophet ﷺ was truthful, then everything else is proven automatically. And this is why some of our scholars focused on writing books on establishing the prophethood of the Prophet, peace be upon him. Because they knew if you establish this, everything else is true. Whatever the Prophet said was true. The Quran was from Allah. Whatever the Quran said, therefore, was also true. So the way you can do this, this particular argument, again, is process of elimination. And what we're doing is there's 3 questions here. Whenever someone makes a statement, whenever someone says a statement or makes a claim, there are 3 possibilities. Either they're lying, either they're deluded, or they're telling the truth. Okay? And what you can say to the non-Muslim is, let's assess the claim of the Prophet, peace be upon him. The Prophet ﷺ made a claim. He said, I am the messenger of Allah. I am the messenger of Allah. Now let's assess this claim. Based on what you know about the Prophet ﷺ's life, on the seerah, hadith, etc., we know the Prophet ﷺ was not a liar. Right? So how do you cross this out now based on what we know about the Prophet? Because the reality is the Prophet, peace be upon him, is probably the most well-documented man in history. Right? Someone can claim that more people know Isa alayhi salam, Jesus, by name or the figure, but to know about someone's life, we probably know more about the Prophet ﷺ than any other person in history. Okay? Now that being the case, why could we conclude and show, how could we show he's not a liar? Yes, brother. Witnesses, what do you mean by witnesses?
I saw that there's witnesses, so that, for example, the Sahaba, they were living with him, companions of him, and then their reports of him were like passed down through generations till today. So there's a track record. So if it's authentic, if it's tracked, then it can't be like if it goes back 1400 years.
Yeah, so companions, okay, yeah. We'll talk about the authenticity of history at the end of it, but companions is one thing, but they may just say, well, yeah, they're his companions, so they will obviously, agree and not say anything bad. What else? What are the specific events, occurrences in the life of the Prophet ﷺ?
So before he became Prophet ﷺ, he was known as the most truthful in his city, and everybody knew him as the one who was honest. And this is before he was even a prophet.
Yes.
So this goes to show that even when he became a prophet, he was still truthful, and he was the same even before.
That's a very powerful, very good point to start with. Right? We know that the Prophet ﷺ was recognized as the truthful and trustworthy one even before prophethood. Right? This was the title he was given by the Arabs. And what's really interesting about the Arabs, I'm going to come to you, brother, in a second. What's really interesting about the Arabs at the time, they weren't known for much. You had 2 superpowers on either side, the Romans and the Persians. And the Arabs, they didn't really give them much time. Right? They had nothing to offer. But they were recognized for a few things, right? Who knows what those things were? What were the Arabs recognized for at the time of the Prophet ﷺ? Yes?
Trade would be one of them.
Trade, okay, yeah, you could say that. Poetry, yes, poetry was a big one.
Hospitality.
Hospitality, yeah. And they were people of their word, like they would die for their word, yeah, if they'd give their word. It was a very tribal community, yeah. Now, amongst people who are known for their truthful nature, generally speaking, they are recognizing someone as the truthful and trustworthy and giving him that title. You know, that says something. It's like saying, us guys here saying this doctor is very good, and a group of doctors saying this doctor is very good, right? So that says something. Yes, brother?
If he was lying, what was the purpose behind his lying? Let's say he wanted women, or he wanted money, or he wanted fame. He was offered all of that. So, if he was offered all of that and he didn't accept, it proves that he's not lying.
Very beautiful point, yeah? So remember, people don't lie for no reason, right? There's always motives behind lying, and there's two main reasons people lie. The psychology of a liar, yeah? There's two main reasons. What are those two reasons? Who could tell me? Yes?
To gain a benefit?
To gain something? A worldly benefit? Yep. No, not necessarily. That would be sadistic. What else?
Fame.
Fame.
Get out of trouble. Or you put yourself in trouble by speaking the truth.
Yeah, to protect oneself, right? Because you naturally know, it's not like it's human nature. You wake up on Monday morning, it says Monday, today's the day to lie. Right? Why do children lie whenever they lie? It's either to protect themselves from getting in trouble or to gain something from a worldly perspective. Now, if you look at both of these motives and you look at the situation of the Prophet ﷺ, he was offered everything at a point. Right? They said, what do you want? Money, women, power, whatever it is. What did the Prophet ﷺ do? He rejected all of this. Right? Now, what does this show? This shows that the Prophet ﷺ had no worldly benefit in mind. He wasn't proclaiming this message for any worldly gain. Because if he was, this was the time to take it. Right? It could have been easily someone could say, oh yeah, now I've got a new revelation that, you know, I can agree with you guys, and if you give me this power, etc. The Prophet ﷺ didn't do this. He stuck by the message, showing he had no worldly gain in mind. Number two, because the Prophet ﷺ stood by his word, stood by what he was preaching, what was the result of that for the early Muslims? Torture, oppression, you know, they were killed, you know, no trade was done with them, etc. Yeah, so there was no protection there. If anything, it put the Muslims in the way of harm, the early followers. Right? So both of those motives are cancelled out. And therefore, how can someone claim that this man was lying? It's impossible. If someone was to claim the Prophet was a liar, then no one ever told the truth in history. Literally. There was no worldly benefit in mind, there was nothing in mind. So you can cross that option out. And there's many other examples you can give, inshallah. Yes, brother?
I know you're probably a good time. Again, how would you claim that this is all truthful in terms of like all the stuff that you were saying about the Arabs say that he's the most truthful, etc. Since it was so long ago, I've known people that said, oh, it's 40, 20 years ago, people won't believe it, etc. And even if you give the statement that, everything's been carried down and stuff like that, and textbooks, etc., Prophet's lives have been documented, etc., they might think that because of how long ago it was, just like the Bible only 600 years before that, then what can you say the differences between the kind of correlation of truthfulness?
Yeah, so most people won't bring that up, but if they bring that up, what you have to do is you have to do a comparison between general Western history and the method and Islamic history, right? And you can do this in a very simple way, right? Normally the example I give is this. Imagine, I'll give you two scenarios. Scenario number one, you're an archaeologist and your lead scientist sends you out to a land and you go start digging. And as you're digging, you come across a letter. And the letter is about a story of a king who did X, Y, and Z, okay? Now I'm not going to give it away, but that you would consider as history, okay? Now, scenario number two, again, you're an archaeologist, your lead professor sends you out to do some archaeology, you start digging, and as you're digging, you come across the same letter, right? Story of a king did this with that and the other, but then there's another letter with it, which talks about the chain of narrators behind the letter, and there's another document with it which tells you about how trustworthy each individual was in the chain, etc. Now you have much more here. Now if you compare scenario one and scenario two, which one is more authentic? Number two, absolutely, right? So the point here is this is a general comparison between Western history and Islamic history, right? Now, if you're going to reject Islamic history, then you have to reject all of history. And if you reject all of history, you can't do anything. You can't even do science, because science is based on history, the historical works of other scientists, right? So you can present that to them, say, look, if you want to reject Islamic history, then that means logically you have to reject all of history. No one's going to be willing to do that. Everyone believes in the historical figures that history tells us exist. So why are you specifically denying a far more robust version of history? That shows something else is going on inside them. They don't want to believe. Brother, you had a question?
Yeah, I was going to say the Quran day, the oldest Quran, or the European, is exactly the same.
Yeah, in Birmingham, isn't it, I think?
They've also found like one of the oldest ones, and it's been carbon dated to about 100 to 200 after Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam died.
Yeah.
And it's exactly the same as the Quran that we have right now. So, that clearly proves that even it hasn't been changed over time and how it's been preserved and things of that nature. So, we'd argue that that's strong enough evidence, along with obviously things that you mentioned already and the chain of narrations, etc., etc.
That's a powerful evidence for the Quran, miracle of the Quran. Because Allah said He would preserve it.
Yeah, it hasn't been changed. And we're talking about just 300 years after. That's how it carbon dated.
Absolutely. And if you look at other historical, especially religious historical documents, one of the main reasons they went through changes and people added to them and subtracted from them, one was obviously profit and to make some money. Some of the rabbis and the leaders did that. But one of the other main reasons was when different dynasties within these religions came to power, they wanted to push their own narrative. So they went to the religious text and changed it so it favored them. Now we know within our history, Islamic history, there have been different dynasties. There have been different groups that have been in power at different times. There have been clashing groups in history. But the Quran never changed. You would expect from a historical standpoint, from a purely secular standpoint, for a text that has had such a huge expanse of civilization across the world, with so many dynasties and civilization, different groups of people that were in power, to change their text to suit their objectives. But the Quran never went through these changes. SubhanAllah. That's a miracle in itself. How that happened, you can't explain it.
It's also like a challenge though, even now, even if we wanted to, we still can't change it.
Yeah.
It's a bit...
You can argue that even now, even if we did want to change it, we couldn't. For example, there's too many people that have memorized it.
Yes.
For example, right now, if I was to read a specific ayah in Fatiha or Surah and I changed one of the letters, I think there'd be a common consensus in the room that would refute me expeditiously.
Yeah, absolutely.
If I changed Fatiha and I said something else, it'd be changed, I'd be corrected.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where, subtle refutation, that's where it should be done, isn't it? Correction, yeah, SubhanAllah. Yeah.
And I think, did it mention something like that in the Quran somewhere?
I don't recall. But the point, so there's so many miracles, right? But going back to this particular point, it's impossible to call the Prophet ﷺ a liar. It's impossible, right? Now someone may say, okay, he wasn't a liar, but they may say he was deluded or someone delusional, right? That believed what he was saying was true, but it wasn't true. How would you respond to this? How can you establish and show them that the Prophet ﷺ was not deluded in any way, shape or form?
The changes, reform, the amount of followers that he had,
Yeah, look at the roles he played in society. He was a family man, he was a trader, he was a religious leader, he was a general, right? He was a spiritual leader. All of these different roles. Crazy people don't play these roles effectively. They don't result in one of the world's largest religions, right? They don't produce texts which are so coherent and have no contradictions, which were revealed over 23 years. They don't give wisdom like the Prophet ﷺ. Non-Muslims who are genuinely studying the Prophet ﷺ and write about him, when you read their books, it blows your mind, subhanAllah. They can appreciate this wisdom. There's a Karen Armstrong biography of the Prophet ﷺ, right? That's a good one. There's another one, it's by a guy called Barnaby Rogerson, I think. His biography is phenomenal by the Prophet ﷺ. I would definitely recommend everyone to read that, or encourage non-Muslims to read that. Because from there, you're getting a non-biased perspective now. It's not a Muslim that's telling you this. So those that genuinely study the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him, even non-Muslims, they are inspired by the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and his wisdom. That's not the characteristics of someone crazy or mad. Right? So you can cross that one out as well. Then what's the only option we're left with? He was telling the truth. That's how easy it is, subhanAllah. Now some Christians may come with some alternative options. They come with a very common one sometimes. They say, He wasn't lying, he wasn't deluded, but what happened was Satan disguised himself and revealed the Quran, and the Prophet didn't know, and that's what happened. How would you refute that? There you go. That's the best way of refuting it. Allahu Akbar. Think about it. Why would Shaitan expose himself and tell you to worship the one creator and to stay away from his traps? And tell us that he's our worst enemy. A funny way of responding is that if Shaitan did this, then he's not Shaitan. Because we know Shaitan's job is what? To mislead human beings till the day of judgment. Right? So it's silly things like this some of them come up with. And that's pretty much it. When you go through this, ask them, does that make sense? Do you agree? Again, logically it's very sound. If they don't agree, there may be something else going on. Find out what that is and address that point as well. Yes, brother?
So I've just got 2 questions from that. Firstly, if somebody agrees with all of this, so I've spoken to my friends in similar arguments, and obviously not details of this, but it's just maybe too big of a jump, for example, or something where they don't agree, they can't do certain things, for example, give up drinking, give up certain foods, etc. Where do we go from there? And also, just a side point, is like, if somebody had an original question that they had at the beginning, and we went through this, how do we link the answer from the original question back to this? For example, if it's going into LGBTQ or oppression, etc., where are we trying to get the link in to answer the original question? Because we still want to do that.
Yes,
there. So what would your kind
So the link is very simple, right? The link is, now that we've appreciated this, we understand that God exists, He's one, He sent revelation, guidance for us, and He's all-knowing and He's told us the way. Then as Muslims, we believe what God has told us because He's all-knowing. We're not all-knowing, and therefore we know, we live in the same environment as you. There are certain things that from today's society's perspective, that there are certain beliefs in today's society which will go against what the Quran says. But we acknowledge what God says because He's the all-knowing being. We just have our subjective opinions, So now you can at least appreciate why we believe what we believe. This is what God has told us. The all-powerful, all-knowing Creator. At least they'll appreciate it from our perspective then. And if you mention that, look, it's a choice really at the end of the day. Either you submit yourself to other people, social norms, ideologies, or you submit yourself to the Creator. Why would any sane person submit themselves to another person who's as flawed as them? Even a group of people, that put things in place just to serve their own purposes. So it's about empowering people like that as well, inshallah. So what was the second point of the question? Where'd you go from here?
Yeah, just like
the sins, yeah.
Oh yeah, I was just asking about for the big jump, for example. Answer for that.
Yeah, so the big jump is we need to remember no human's perfect. Yeah, especially when it comes to non-Muslims, the very first thing we should be concerned with is that they acknowledge their Creator and they submit to Him, right? With their baggage. They're committing sins, because a lot of times this becomes an excuse, and Shaitan uses this as well. Oh, you're still drinking, I'm still have a girlfriend, I'm still doing this. So I'm going to wait until I stop doing these things, which may never happen, till I become Muslim. You rather someone die on the Shahada, committing sins, as opposed to die just committing sins, not taking the Shahada, right? Yeah. So first step is get them to take the Shahada, if they're ready. If these are barriers for them, clarify for them that look, it's one step at a time. Islam doesn't expect perfection. It expects persistence. You're persistently trying to worship your Creator the best you can, right? So just welcome them in, remove these barriers for them. Say, look, don't worry, we'll work on these things slowly over time. First step is take your Shahada. Second step is you learn the Salah and start connecting with your Creator. And when you start doing that, you'll realize the energy and strength you get from Allah to overcome these things. So empower them like that.
Again, with not just sins, for example, what about from people who come from similar Asian backgrounds or other religions, for example, for Indian subcontinent, etc., but they have the kind of same cultural barriers where they're their family will never agree to it, etc., and they might be quite harsh with their beliefs, etc. What kind of advice?
Well, if they're ready and they know, and I've seen many brothers like this and sisters who come from a Sikh or a Hindu background, and with the Sikh community, they have to stay. They're worried about repercussions of taking the Shahada and becoming Muslim, unfortunately. But the thing is, what they've done is they've kept it to themselves, right? So, and one brother spent, I think, 6 or 7 years, he was Muslim and he was practicing to whatever he could without telling his family. You know, I think at a point it got to the point where Allah made the situation where he could tell his family and it was fine. You know, and you know, inshallah he's going to be doing some outreach work as well soon as well. So Allah will facilitate. It's a test. They can keep it to themselves. Fundamentally, it's between them and Allah. It's not about you, me, or anyone else. Yeah. So they can keep it to themselves. He was praying in his room. On Jummah, he would have his clothes in the car and he would change in the car and he would go pray. And he was doing that for many years. It was difficult. It wasn't ideal, but he was sensible. Because some people get very sort of, especially the younger guys, get very passionate. I'm going to tell my family I don't care. And then they get kicked out and it ruins their relationships and it causes problems. When they don't have to do that. You know, just, and tell him make dua. Tell him to make dua. Loads of dua. We should make dua for them as well. That Allah makes it easy for them, inshallah. Because they struggle, some of these new Muslims, man. They go through a lot of difficulties, hardships. So encourage them, and then when they do take shahada, if they take shahada with you, don't just let it be the end there. Yeah, take care of them to the best of your ability. We have a new Muslim mentorship program in iERA, so you can always pass them over to us, so we can put them with a mentor. But initially, at least for the first few weeks, take care of them, teach them some of the basics, reaffirm some of the points, you know, that you believe in Allah is uniquely one. Just basic things. Spend time with them, be there for them, because they're going to be going through some very difficult times, you know, initially. So yeah, that's where the hard work starts, after the shahada. That's the exciting, that was the exciting part, yeah? But no one wants to do the hard work, you know, so try to do the best you can, inshallah. Because you know, I'll tell you guys this, yeah? Alhamdulillah, we get excited, you know, Islam is the fastest growing religion, there's so many people accepting Islam, it's the truth. But the back end of it, you know what the retention rate of Muslims is in the West? And this is just a reported retention rate. It's about 40%. That means what? 60% of people that accept Islam leave Islam. That's shocking. You know, so in the grand scheme of things, we're not, you know, we need to sort this out, inshallah. And we'll try to facilitate for new Muslims as well the best we can, inshallah. Any other questions? So it's just Q&A now, inshallah, and then we can wrap up. Okay. Brother Murtada, while we're doing Q&A, he's going to send a form around. It's just a volunteering form. Anyone that's interested in doing volunteering for iERA, etc. You guys can put your name down and your details down, inshallah. Sorry, brother.
Yeah, so my question from before, like, one question non-Muslims can ask is, in the Quran, why is Allah referred
Who's speaking? Sorry, I can't. Oh, sorry, bro. Yeah.
Why is Allah referred to as He in the Quran? Why not she? Or why is He even referred to as He?
Yeah, so it's the way it's translated into the English language. Yeah, gender does not apply to Allah, right? But language is restricted always because it's human mode of communication. We are limited as human beings, so Allah is communicating with limited human beings, right? Now the term huwa, generally that's used, the pronoun, the masculine pronoun, it's used to refer to male, but it's also used to refer to other things, inanimate things as well. Right? So it's just a term, it's a word that's used, and therefore it's very difficult to translate. In English, when you translate, you have to just translate as he. What's interesting, one of these, I think he's Muslim, his name's Thomas Cleary, he's a revert, and he did a translation, he's an Arabist as well, he's an academic. He did a translation where he didn't use or translate the pronoun into he. He did it another way, which was quite interesting, but it's very difficult in English. Like what can you do? It's just best you could do is explain to them, this is a translation. God does not have a male or female gender, right? And it's just the use of the masculine pronoun, which was the common norm in Arabia at the time, in the Arabic language itself, to refer to beings, people, things, etc.
So the default pronoun is literally huwa.
Yeah.
So that's what they use for everything.
Yeah, it's not that God is a he. Yeah, so it doesn't work like that. Even the plural, yeah, that, you know, nahnu, we, when Allah says we, they say, oh, who is these we? They are other beings. No, it's just about majesty. Yeah, remember, it's the creator of the heavens and the earth communicating with limited human beings, right? So, and there's other principles in the Quran which tell us that we understand this properly. Laysa kamithlihi shay. There's nothing like Allah. There is no kufu. There's nothing comparable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So therefore, how can you, when you got that principle, how can we now say he's a he, a gender, which is a human thing, right? So you can clarify like that to them as well. Sure.
Don't royals use the term we to refer to themselves as well?
Yeah, it's used in the royal sense as well, yeah. Yes, brother.
So you mentioned in that translation, you didn't translate who as he.
Yeah.
So do you know how you...
I'm trying to remember. I can't remember top of my head. I think he used maybe God again, or just used the word God instead of the he. twice over, instead of saying, yeah, that's fine. So any other questions, brothers?
I was just interested to know, like, I was speaking to somebody and they came from the angle of like, you know, the Islamic world, of how kind of it's in pieces, and like, if Islam was so perfect and the Quran is so perfect, then the Sharia would have made everything perfect, right? But when they look at the Islamic world and it's like suffering, and historically there's always been problems, and I responded like, you know, you can't judge Islam by the actions of imperfect Muslims, and you know, Sharia isn't perfectly implemented and so on and so on. But then they were like responding the way that's kind of like a cop out, like how many chances are you going to get, or Islamic country going to get to implement, and it's still not isn't going to work. So I would respond to that.
Yes, there's a lot behind that, bro. They try to just, you know, simplify it and say, oh, you got many. Well, normally they're referring to a very short period in history, yeah, which is modern history. Yeah, if you look throughout history, there were times where Islam was implemented properly, especially, you know, amongst the first 3 generations, and it was beautiful, bro. You know, all of these ills of society didn't exist then. You know, there was no one there to take money from this, or the pot that was there for the poor to take from. You know, so, and it was implemented properly. But they just look at the modern perspective, and obviously when you look at, without getting myself in trouble in any way, but if you look at the countries that are implementing Islam today, generally speaking, it's not only Islam that's being implemented, right? It's Islam plus, or Islam fitted into another political system, which is ridiculous. How are you going to expect it to work when there's a complete system in and of itself, and you're trying to build this hybrid? It's not going to work, you know? And that's why you have these issues, you know, problems, you know? So that's how I would address it. But your point is right. It's like you know, if a crazy person's driving a Ferrari and smashes it into a tree, you don't blame the car. Yeah, so it's Muslims are fallible. We make mistakes. We're not perfect.
The other issue they bring up is Shias. Why is it split right after Ali and
Yeah, I mean, you can just generally gloss it over. You can say, look, there was a political divide at a certain point in our history, right? But it's not relevant to what we need to talk about as the fundamentals.
They'll try and say which one is the truthful one.
Well, just tell them.
They'll say like, how do you prove?
Yeah, but then you have to say, look, I can appreciate you have these questions. Like I would do this in that scenario, yeah? I really appreciate you have these specific questions about the Sunni-Shia divide in history. However, what you really need to focus on is the fundamentals of Islam, right? So those are what's really important. Once you understand those and we get somewhere with that, then we can spend your entire life studying the history of Islam and the 1400 years, yeah? But it's not going to really benefit you. So again, you have to take it back. You have to take control of the conversation. Don't let them lead you off on tangents. Inshallah. If you know the history and you can summarize it in like a minute or two, then you can do that, inshallah.
Just to add to the question brother was asking about the word Allah, why did you use as a word? Generally, in Arabic, we know it doesn't have the neutral intent. You know, when you say a book or a card, you say it's under the car and stuff like that. So Arabic is all the nouns are either feminine or masculine.
Yes.
And the Arabic grammarians, they said feminine words, they have a certain type of outlook. Either it ends in a round ta, it ends in alif maksura or alif mamduda, or it is feminine by itself in nature. If it doesn't fall under this, then the option left is to make it really masculine.
Yes.
That's why the word Allah and the word in our face.
Jazakallah khair, Shaykh. Jazakallah khair. Brilliant point.
Secondly,
yes.
If they come up with the Big Bang theory and Darwinism, how would you approach that?
Yeah, so Big Bang, we can address through the arguments, right? If there was a Big Bang, what caused it? There has to be a cause. There has to be something behind it. Things don't come from nothing. Nothing comes from nothing, right? So even if you say there was a single atom, whatever they say, that has to come from something. It can't just come from nothing, right? As far as Darwinism and evolution, again, what's been taught in schools and on a popular level is that the Darwinian mechanism of evolution is true, it's a fact, right? That's how it's taught in textbooks. It's actually a lie, right? It's an oversimplified lie. Because in science, there are no absolute truths, number one. No theory is true. When it comes to evolution, even in evolution, there are different models. There's different models. You have the pig-chimp hypotheses. You have all of these different hypotheses in evolution. The Darwinian mechanism is one hypothesis amongst many others, right? But that's the one they're popularizing. Now, there's obviously other political, social reasons behind it, right? Because what that does from an atheist, secular perspective is it does away with the need for God, or they think that's the case, yeah? So they're popularizing that. But the reality is that there's many different models, and none of the models are absolutely true, 100%. One of them could be true, but it's from a scientific perspective, but none of them are absolutely 100% true, right? So that's one thing to understand. The second thing to understand is, even if, for the sake of argument, right? For the sake of argument, if you say, look, fine, evolution, to entertain you, if evolution happened like you're saying it happened, right? What caused the first cell to divide? Where did that first cell come from? The first replicating cell, where did that come from? They have no answers. It's just an explanation they have for the development of species and life. It's not an explanation from where it all started. They're still lost as far as that. They don't have answers. Where did that first replicating cell come from? They don't know. There has to be a cause behind that, right? So, but it's one of the models. It's a popular model. That's why we say, the way we say is, when Muslims say there's a Muslim biologist, scientist, right? When you're doing the science, use their models, no problem, do the science, but it doesn't have to affect your theology, right? Just keep it separate. It's just a working model. That's what it is. Science has working models. The Darwinian mechanism is a working model, right? That's all it is. Yes, brother.
Just got a question from the sister.
Yes, brother.
How do you divert to Tawheed first when someone asks why a bad Muslim gets to go to Jannah and a good non-Muslim goes to hellfire? How do you appropriately separate the two?
Okay, so that's, again, it's a genuine question, but I would still do the same thing. What I would say is, look, that's a brilliant question, and it's a very thoughtful question, right? But for us to now appreciate this, we need to understand the basics of Islam first, the fundamentals. And when you cover those fundamentals, and we can get them to appreciate the magnitude of Tawheed, right? What Tawheed is, and how important it is for the human being to recognize and acknowledge it, then we can get them to appreciate why this is the case, why even a bad Muslim eventually would go to Jannah, and a non-Muslim. The reason people ask this question is because they don't value, or they don't understand the value of Tawheed, the significance of Tawheed, right? They have other questions like this. For example, they sometimes say, why would God punish someone for an eternity, forever, for sins committed and denial in this short temporary life? Right? What are they doing? What's the problem? The problem is they're not valuing Tawheed, right? Because we know Allah is the most just. If Allah said that there's an eternal punishment for a sin you commit in this world, then that's a just punishment. So the real question we should be asking is, how severe is the crime? That's the real question. How severe is the crime which leads to an eternal punishment? So it's about reframing people's questions and exposing sometimes the assumptions behind them. Yeah, I mean, where did you get morality from? We didn't go into it, but this is why we live in the society today. Honestly, brothers and sisters, if you knew some of the stuff I know about where people are going and the crazy stuff that's taking place, you're shocking. I'm sure some of you already know about this stuff. People have lost the plot. They're just doing anything and everything, whatever they think is right, without getting into detail, because some of these are hot topics, and you need to these days be careful with what you say as well, before they misquote you. Yes, bro.
So of course, I know we've run over this in the call pass. For the Q&A, one question is, the argument a lot of people bring up is about the age of Sayyidina Aisha.
Yeah.
And I know it's only more recently become a factor that people try to use in Islam. So if somebody comes with certain claims and certain accusations, then how would you address that?
First thing I'll say, that book I quoted, the Barnaby Rogerson book, the Prophet Muhammad's biography that he wrote. There are a couple, I think page 37 onwards, or page 30 onwards, he speaks about the marriages of the Prophet ﷺ. Just read how this non-Muslim writes about that. It's phenomenal. Yeah. So that would be one way you can address it. But I'll leave you, I'm not going to give it to you, you can read it for yourself, inshallah, yeah. Because we should be reading more anyway, inshallah, yeah. So we should be reading all of this stuff. But the other way you can address it is, look, there's many factors. You have to remember, look, you can take the angle of the time in history and the way people matured at the time. There is a science to this as well. People in the desert at the time matured much earlier. But the other thing you can mention is that, look, in Islam, marriage is not about an arbitrary figure, a number that you put. Like 18 in the UK, in certain parts of Greece it's still 13 the age of consent, marriage, even till today, right? In other parts of the world, it's 16, some people say 14, some people say 19. It's just an arbitrary number that people put on marriage these days. In Islam, it's not about an arbitrary number. There are factors that have to be looked at. Is the person physically mature enough? Are they emotionally mature enough, etc.? All of these things. And then marriage takes place. And if you look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ at the time, when he got married to Aisha radiallahu anha, none of his enemies made it an issue. Why didn't they make it an issue?
Socially acceptable.
Yeah, it was fine in that social context. It was a normal practice at the time. Because the enemies of the Prophet would have made it a big issue at the time if it was something odd in their time, right? So, and also, we're not saying that you have to transport that into today's day and age. You don't have to do that yourself. No one's saying that. No Muslim has to do that themselves, right? But within that context, within that framework, on top of it, it was something that Allah had dictated to the Prophet, right? And then further, look at what Aisha radiallahu anha had to say about the Prophet. Read that. Did she complain about anything? Did she say anything bad about the Prophet? She only had praise for the Prophet, peace be upon him. Another wisdom for this, one of the greatest scholars of hadith was Aisha radiallahu anha, one of the first. Why? Look at the wisdom. Because she was at a younger age, she had much more time to learn, mature over time, and she became the teacher of many of the next generations. You know, so there are many wisdoms behind this, and it's within a certain cultural context as well, which no one is saying you have to transport over to the 21st century. Yeah, so that's how I would address it. You know, sure, from your perspective today, you know, from the 21st century, you know, there's many things that are not going to add up for you. You know, but again, it goes back to that thing. Bring them to the foundations, give them the right lenses, and hopefully that will help clarify things for them more, inshallah. Any other questions?
Do you have any tips for when we're out there in the Commonwealth Games, kind of how to kind of, you know, demeanor-wise, and you know, sometimes you have brothers at a dawah school don't look that inviting, right? You kind of like, you want to walk past because they look a bit angry. So,
yeah, it's a big thing. Like, just smile, main thing. The Prophet ﷺ always used to smile, so smile, right? Keep smiling. Trust me, for a non-Muslim to see a bearded guy smile is a big thing. It's a shock, right? That itself will break most of these stereotypes, inshallah. Keep smiling. Just be natural, welcome people, say thank you to them. Even if they don't take material from you, say thank you to them, have a nice day. Just be really nice to people.
Is there a dress code for giving them a...
Dress code, all I would say in regards to dress code is, look, if there's flexibility within our tradition as far as how you dress, then consider the culture of the people, consider the barriers that are there. If we know that psychologically wearing our traditional clothes is going to be a barrier for them approaching you, it can be a barrier, then you don't have to wear that. Just wear something that they'll be comfortable with as well. But you don't have to. You can be flexible. But if you want to think about it, then I would say maybe just dress, you know, normal as Westerners do within reason, right? But again, it'll depend on the areas. I think Birmingham's fine, because non-Muslims in Birmingham have been used to Muslims for a very long time. So it's not a problem. It's not a cultural shock for them. But in some areas, like we go to some areas, down south and up north, and these are small villages, you know, which people haven't even heard of Islam. There's places like this in the UK. And there, obviously, like, you have to be, like, even, I would just wear normal clothes, like trouser, t-shirt, right? And I would go with him. He looks like a doctor, mashallah, yeah? He has this doctor look, yeah? Like your friendly neighborhood Indian doctor, mashallah, yeah? So when we go to these places, I noticed that they were warming to him. And at the time when we went, I had like long hair and everything, yeah? So I looked a bit, maybe, you know, there's the stereotypical, you know, idea that they have in their head about aggressive Muslims, whatever, yeah? So I noticed that they were being averse to me. They were looking at me in a funny way. They weren't too comfortable. So what I did was I stepped back. I said, bro, you go do your thing. I'm just going to sit back and watch, yeah? And that worked. He went in the shops. He gave the shopkeepers Qur'ans, had conversations with them, and it was really good, mashallah. Right? So these are small things you need to, but in Birmingham, it shouldn't be an issue, inshallah. I think people are well cultured here, mashallah.
If somebody has a question and comes by and asks for something, but they haven't got time to have a full, mashallah, 5, 10, 15, 20, however long, should we answer the question to the best of our ability, or should we just say, we need to talk more, we need to discuss this more, and take a lot
if they've told you they have 5-10 minutes, then if they've told you they have 5-10 minutes, okay, it depends on the question. If it's an easy question, you can quickly answer it, and say, before you go, I want to quickly share with you why as Muslims we believe what we believe, right? And then quickly share something about Tawheed with them, oneness of Allah, the Prophet ﷺ. You could do that in 5-10 minutes, you know. So that's what I would do. Again, you can be flexible with this whole thing, inshallah. Remember the acronym, the GORAP acronym is there because when you're in a real conversation with someone, you can easily lose track of what you're saying, yeah, and you can go off onto tangents because it's quite nerve-wracking sometimes. But if you remember the GORAP, it'll give you a sort of guidance onto what to come back to as well and what to talk about, inshallah. Inshallah, there's a question by the sisters about the books. So you know the Eternal Challenge books, inshallah. We'll send them over to you, Brother Zegum, and we'll get them over so you can give the sisters some of those books that they can hand to non-Muslims after they've read it, inshallah, as well. And the other question is about the A in the GORAP. So the GORAP is GORAP. The A is just there for and, basically. But you can use it for akhirah or afterlife as well, inshallah. That's my own addition to the GORAP. But sometimes you could talk about the hereafter as well, because some people may need that little extra incentive, inshallah. Yeah, Jazakallah khair. May Allah bless you, brothers and sisters, inshallah.